Hey guys, tonight we slip into a 19th-century American December that does not feel like the December you think you know. The air is sharper, the streets are darker, and the idea of Christmas magic is more like a rumor somebody swears they heard in another town. You stand outside a small house where the windows glow weakly, not with twinkly lights, but with a single lamp trying its best. Snow squeaks under your boots. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks like it has personal beef with the entire winter season. And here is your reality check, delivered with love. If you're expecting a jolly old man to swoop in and fix everyone's mood with a sack of gifts, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, drop a comment telling me where you are in the world and what time it is there, because I love picturing all of you getting cozy at the exact same moment. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step closer to the door and realize something immediately. This is not a season that belongs to children yet, not really. There is no universal expectation of stockings, no standardized Santa mythology, no bright, synchronized, neighborhood-wide attempt to outjingle the neighbors. The holiday exists, yes, but it is uneven, patchy, and frankly a bit confused, like a party where half the guests are in costume and the other half did not get the memo. Inside, the heat is local and stubborn, gathered around a fireplace that pops and sighs as if it is doing emotional labor. The room smells like smoke, damp wool, and something faintly sweet that might be molasses or might be wishful thinking. You look around and see plain decorations, if any. Maybe a sprig of evergreen pinned near a doorway, more for scent and tradition than for sparkle. And in many homes, even that is absent. The idea of dragging a whole tree inside your parlor, still not mainstream here. That is a later flex. The kind of thing that will spread as tastes shift and as people start treating Christmas as a domestic stage set. Right now, Christmas in early 1800s, America is more like a weather system than an event. Some people feel it strongly, others barely notice it. In certain places, it is more church-centered, a day of worship and solemnity. In other places, it is suspicious, even scolded. And in some places, it is rowdy, loud and public in a way that would make your modern self clutch your hot cocoa like it is a safety device. You walk through a small town street and see what holiday season means here. Short daylight, long nights. Work that does not stop just because the calendar says you should be sentimental. Farmers still care for animals. Shopkeepers still tally accounts. Women still cook and mend and keep the household from sliding into chaos. Kids still do kid things, which mostly involves finding ways to be cold and muddy at the same time. An art form they will never stop mastering. A mainstream historical fact settles into your mind like a warm stone. Christmas was not always a widely embraced holiday in America, especially in parts of New England where Puritan influence lingered. In earlier colonial periods, some communities actively discouraged or even banned Christmas celebrations, viewing them as too tied to old, popish traditions or disorderly revelry. You can still feel that shadow here, even as the 1800s move forward and attitudes soften. It is not that everyone hates Christmas. It is that Christmas has to earn its place, and it does not do it by being adorable. You pass a church and hear a few voices inside. Not a full choir, not a grand concert. Just people gathering because religion gives structure to winter. The building smells of old wood and breath, and the hymns are more restrained than what you might associate with the season. The emphasis is on devotion, not on spectacle. For some folks, that is the point. For others, it is a missed opportunity. Historians still argue whether the transformation of Christmas into a warm, family-centered holiday is mainly driven by religious revival, by social reform, or by the rise of a growing middle class, hungry for cozy traditions that make life feel organized. You can almost hear the debate in the creak of pews and the shuffle of boots. Outside again. You notice how dark the world is once the sun drops. No glowing reindeer on rooftops, no LED icicles. Just black sky and the occasional lantern bobbing like a slow-moving firefly. People do not linger outdoors for fun unless they have a reason. And if they do linger, it is often the kind of reason that involves noise. Because here is the thing. Before Santa becomes the soft, round ambassador of goodwill, there is an older holiday impulse that is not always polite. In some communities, Christmas time is associated with misrule, the temporary loosening of social rules. You get a taste of it in the way young men laugh louder than usual, in the way a group might roam from house to house expecting treats or drink, and in the way some homeowners brace themselves like they're about to negotiate with winter itself. This is where a quirky tidbit slides into your pocket. In parts of the Anglo-American world, there are traditions of wassailing and Christmasing that can look, from a modern angle, like a mix between caroling, trick-or-treating, and mild extortion with festive branding. People might show up, sing or shout, and expect food, drink, or coins. Refuse too firmly, and you might risk mischief. Not always, but the possibility hangs there like mistletoe with an attitude. It is the holiday as social pressure, the holiday as community enforcement, the holiday as be generous, or else. You imagine telling your modern neighbor, "Hello, it is Christmas. Please provide cider or face consequences." And you almost laugh out loud. That is joke number one, and it lands softly, because even you know you would hand over the cider just to keep the peace. The second joke arrives when you picture a 19th century group showing up at your apartment door, only to be stopped cold by a modern peephole and a laminated "no soliciting" sign. The third joke is the quietest. You realize the real reason Santa will become popular is not just magic. It is because he is a controlled, indoor-friendly version of all this social chaos. A mythical delivery man is easier than a gang of singing strangers with opinions. But in this first section, Santa is not here yet. Or rather, he exists only as fragments, hints, echoes from European traditions. Maybe you hear a Dutch family in New York mention Sinterklaas in a way that feels like a private family thing, not a national mascot. Maybe a child has heard a story about St. Nicholas, a saint known for generosity. But it is not standardized. There is no universal look, no single narrative everyone agrees on. If you asked 10 people what the gift bringer is like, you might get 12 answers, some involving saints, some involving spirits, some involving basically nothing at all. You drift back toward the little house with a glowing window. Inside, dinner is simple. The food is heavy, built for cold weather. You might smell roast, or stew, or bread baked because bread is always needed. If there is something special, it is special in the way that scarcity makes anything slightly extra feel like a feast. The table is not groaning under a mountain of sweets, because sugar is expensive and time is precious. People talk, but not with the bright, performative cheer you are used to. Their warmth is quieter. Their joy is practical. They survived another year. They are still together. The fire is going. That is plenty. You notice children watching adults more than they watch the clock. There is no cultural countdown to a morning explosion of gifts. There is anticipation, sure, but it is not universal. A child might get a small treat, maybe an orange or a simple toy if the family can spare it. But the holiday is not yet built around childhood wonder. It is built around community rhythms, religious practice, winter survival, and sometimes a little controlled misbehavior. And yet, you can sense a shift coming. You can feel it in the way people talk about improving the holiday, in the way some leaders want less public rowdiness and more private virtue, in the way urban life is growing and reformers are increasingly interested in turning chaotic traditions into something gentler, something that teaches restraint and generosity and family togetherness. This is where the story starts to lean forward, like a sleigh runner testing snow. As you stand near the hearth, letting the heat soften your fingers, you realize this is Christmas before the brand, before the uniform imagery, before the red suit becomes a cultural shorthand for comfort. It is rougher, quieter, and more varied. It can be sacred or silly. It can be neighborly or threatening. It can be a church day, a street day, or just another winter day with slightly better food if you're lucky. The fire cracks, and you watch the sparks lift up and vanish into the chimney like tiny escaping thoughts. Outside, someone laughs in the dark. Inside, someone hums an old tune without calling it a carol, and you take a slow breath, because you're about to walk deeper into a century that will reshape this holiday piece by piece until Santa finally has a place to land. You wake into a morning that feels judgmental, the kind of cold that does not just chill your bones, but seems to question your life choices. This is New England cold, disciplined and stern, and it matches the mood you sense in the air. Christmas exists here, technically, but it does so under supervision, like a guest who once flipped a table and is still being watched closely. You walk through a town shaped by old ideas that have not entirely loosened their grip. Even though the strict bans on Christmas from earlier Puritan days are mostly gone by the early 1800s, the attitude lingers. Celebrating too enthusiastically still feels vaguely suspicious. You can feel it in the way people lower their voices when they talk about festivities, or in how they emphasize church attendance over anything that might look like indulgence. Here, Christmas is supposed to behave. A mainstream historical fact slides quietly into place. Early Puritan leaders in colonial New England had actively opposed Christmas celebrations, seeing them as unbiblical and dangerously tied to excess, disorder, and Catholic tradition. While outright bans faded by the 19th century, the cultural aftertaste remained strong. You're walking through that aftertaste now. It is not hostile exactly, but it is cautious. Christmas has been allowed back into the room, but it is sitting in a straight-backed chair with its hands folded. You notice how the day unfolds with a sense of restraint. Shops may close, but not with fanfare. People attend church, where sermons focus less on joy and more on reflection, discipline, and moral improvement. There is no explosion of pageantry. The hymns are steady, almost workmanlike. Even the candles seem to burn with purpose rather than sparkle. You imagine modern Christmas playlists trying to survive here and failing immediately, fading out after the first jingle. As you step outside the church, you hear murmurs of disagreement, though no one raises their voice. Some townspeople feel Christmas should be more cheerful, more generous, more human. Others worry that too much cheer leads to moral decay, which in their worldview is basically the slippery slope equivalent of stepping onto black ice. Historians still argue whether this tension slowed the spread of Christmas traditions in America or whether it actually sharpened them, forcing celebrations to become more intentional, more inward, and eventually more family-focused. You pass a group of young men lingering near the edge of town, their laughter sharper than the rest of the day allows. They are not drunk, at least not yet, but they carry that restless energy that winter seems to concentrate. This is where the pushback lives. even in communities that prefer quiet observance. There are always people itching to bend the rules. Christmas, to them, is permission. Permission to mock authority. Permission to test boundaries. Permission to be loud when the rest of the year demands restraint. The town elders know this. That is part of why they keep such a close eye on the holiday. Public misrule is not theoretical here. It has history. Memories of past Christmas seasons include broken fences, smashed windows, and nights that spiraled into chaos under the excuse of tradition. So when leaders emphasize sobriety and church-going, it is not just piety. It is crowd control with a theological wrapper. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you walk past a notice posted near the meeting house. In some towns, authorities used Christmas as a moral checkpoint, watching closely to see who drank too much, who skipped services, and who behaved out of season. The holiday became a kind of social test. You imagine being graded on your Christmas conduct, and suddenly the idea of getting coal feels merciful by comparison. That is joke 1, slipping in gently. Joke 2 arrives when you picture a modern office holiday party judged by these standards and realize no one would survive. Joke 3 is quieter and almost sympathetic. Even the people enforcing these rules are tired, cold, and craving warmth. Control is their version of comfort. Inside homes, celebrations adapt. Instead of loud public revelry, families keep things small and contained. A nice meal. Maybe a prayer that lasts a little longer than usual. Maybe a visit to relatives if the roads allow it. Children are told to behave especially well, not because Santa is watching, but because God is, and also because their parents have had enough stress already. You sit at a table where conversation circles familiar topics: the harvest, the weather, neighbors who moved west, neighbors who did not survive the year. Christmas becomes a moment of accounting, spiritual and practical. Gratitude mixes with anxiety. There is joy, but it is tempered, like sugar rationed carefully into tea. Too much would feel indulgent. Too little would feel bleak. Everyone is trying to get it right. And yet, beneath this careful surface, something is shifting. The country itself is changing. Cities are growing. Immigration is increasing. Different cultural ideas about Christmas are bumping into each other like bundled strangers on a narrow sidewalk. Not everyone agrees that restraint is the best way forward. Some see the holiday's potential to soften life, to humanize industrial schedules and social hierarchies. Others fear that softness leads to weakness. You notice how children respond to this tension. They are perceptive. They sense when adults are conflicted. A child watches a candle flicker and wonders why there is not more to this day. Not in a greedy way, but in a curious one. Why does everyone seem so serious when the story itself is about a birth? About hope entering a cold world? That question does not get answered yet, but it lingers. You step back outside as dusk approaches, and the town settles into itself. No street parties, no roaming bands demanding treats, just the crunch of boots, the closing of shutters, the slow retreat indoors. For some, this feels safe. For others, it feels like a missed opportunity. Christmas, in this environment, is restrained potential energy. Historians still argue whether the eventual rise of a child-centered, Santa-driven Christmas was a reaction against this moral tightness or a natural evolution as society searched for emotional balance. Standing here, you can feel both interpretations breathing through the same cold air. The discipline shaped the reaction softened the discipline. Neither exists without the other. As night falls, you return to the hearth, the fire steady and reliable. You notice how the quiet allows thoughts to stretch out. There is no rush, no countdown, just time, heavy and slow, like snow gathering on a roof. You realize that this version of Christmas teaches endurance more than excitement. It teaches how to hold still through winter, how to find meaning without spectacle. And maybe that is why it eventually has to change. Humans, after all, are not built only for restraint. They need ritual that feels generous. They need stories that feel warm. They need symbols that say it is okay to rest, to give, to delight in something unnecessary. For now, though, you sit in the disciplined glow of candlelight, feeling both protected and slightly confined. Christmas is here, but it is on probation. And as you drift toward sleep, wrapped in wool and quiet, you sense that the holiday itself is waiting, gathering ideas, preparing to loosen its collar in the decades to come. You step into the season again, and it greets you with a problem you did not know you needed. The calendar is not as tidy as your modern brain wants it to be. You are used to Christmas being a fixed point, a big red pin on the map of December. Here, it is more like a cluster of pins, some placed firmly, some wobbling, some argued over, and some ignored entirely depending on where you stand. You walk along a road dusted with snow, heading toward another church, another town, another set of customs. The air smells like pine and chimney smoke. A crow hops along a fence rail like it is judging you personally. You feel the season in your cheeks, in your ears, in the way every breath feels like it has texture. And you notice how people talk about the holiday with different emphases. Some say Christmas Day with reverence. Some say the holidays, as if it is a vague stretch of time where normal rules soften. Some say almost nothing, but still bake something slightly nicer because even the quietest communities understand winter needs comfort. A mainstream historical fact anchors you. Christmas sits within a larger Christian calendar, and in the 19th century, many Americans still connect the season more strongly to religious observance than to a single festive day. Advent, the period leading up to Christmas, is observed in various traditions, while the days after Christmas carry their own meanings in older European Christian practice. But in America, practice is uneven, and denominational differences matter. Some churches emphasize Christmas deeply, others keep it subdued. Some communities are shaped by older liturgical patterns, others are shaped by a suspicion of them. You enter a church and feel that difference like stepping into a different climate. In a more liturgical setting, the season has structure. There are prayers and readings that build toward Christmas. There is a sense of time being guided, like a slow procession. In a more plain Protestant setting, there might be a Christmas sermon, but not much else. The focus is on Scripture, not on ceremony. You can almost hear the tension between those approaches in the pauses between hymns. Historians still argue whether the American Christmas became what it became because it was de-churched into a secular family holiday, or whether churches themselves helped shape the cozy domestic version by promoting gentler, more devotional celebrations. The truth is, you can feel both forces at once. Some people want Christmas to stay anchored in worship. Others want it to become a cultural truce, a day when even the non-religious can participate in warmth and giving. Now the calendar confusion really starts to show itself when you listen to how people handle the days around Christmas. In older traditions, Christmas is not a single-day event. It is part of a longer stretch that includes feasting, visiting, and sometimes a sense that the world is allowed to breathe differently for a while. You hear talk of 12 days like a half-remembered tune, but you also notice that for many Americans, work and travel realities compress the holiday. Winter is hard. Distance is real. The rhythms of farming, trade, and early industry do not always care that your soul wants a long, festive arc. You wander through a marketplace where people are stocking up, not just for Christmas, but for winter. Barrels, sacks, dried goods, candles. The holiday is tangled up with survival. You smell apples stored in cellars, salted meat, and the sharp, briny hint of oysters if you are near a coastal town. The chatter is practical. Someone is worried about roads icing over. Someone is worried about money. Someone is worried about a relative's cough that has lingered too long. Christmas is there, but it is not always the headline. A quirky tidbit slips in like a secret. In some places, the season carries folk beliefs about special nights when the boundary between the ordinary and the uncanny feels thinner. People might talk about omens, dreams, or strange weather signs. Even in communities that pride themselves on sobriety and reason, winter invites superstition the way a dark room invites your imagination to start inventing shapes. You imagine someone insisting the way the wind moans in the chimney means something. You want to roll your eyes, but you also find yourself listening, because the sound is genuinely spooky. Joke 1. You realize your modern self would absolutely Google wind omen meaning at 2 a.m. Then regret it. Joke 2. You picture a 19th century person trying to fact-check a superstition and having to, what? Ask a neighbor named Ezekiel who owns one book. Joke 3. You recognize that half of modern holiday magic is basically superstition with better marketing. You move into a home where a family is preparing for the day. There is no glittering tree in the corner. Maybe there is greenery. Maybe not. The centerpiece is the hearth and the table. People are dressed a little nicer, not flashy, but cared for. There is a sense of occasion, though it is quieter than what you are used to. A prayer is said, food is shared, the mood is solemn in places, tender in others. Outside, you hear bells in one town, silence in another. You start to realize that Christmas in 19th century America is not a single story. It is many stories running in parallel. In some immigrant communities, older European patterns hold. In others, those patterns fade quickly under American pressures. In some regions, Christmas is becoming more popular as the century progresses. In others, it stays muted. The calendar itself becomes a kind of battlefield for meaning. Does the season belong to the church, to the family, to the streets, to commerce, to children? You can feel different groups tugging at it. Clergy tugging toward devotion. Reformers tugging toward respectable domesticity. Rowdy young men tugging toward misrule. Merchants tugging toward profit. Parents tugging toward anything that makes winter easier on the kids. Historians still argue whether the biggest driver of change is cultural blending from immigration or a conscious reinvention by writers and editors who wanted a national holiday that felt unified. Standing here, you can see why the argument persists. The changes are happening from multiple directions at once. Like streams joining into a river, a tradition from Germany arrives here. A poem from New York spreads there. A newspaper editorial scolds rowdiness. A pastor preaches charity. A shop window displays something enticing. Each small pressure nudges the season into a more recognizable shape. As night falls, you walk through a neighborhood where a few windows glow. You notice a household where people sing, not loud enough to be a street spectacle, but enough to fill the room. The song is familiar and unfamiliar at once. The melody might be old, the words adjusted. That is how culture moves here, not by sudden decree, but by people changing small things to fit their lives. You pause and let the sound wash over you. The cold bites, but the singing makes it softer. You think about how the calendar, for all its confusion, is doing something important. It is giving people permission to mark time differently, to pause, to reflect, to gather, Even if they cannot agree on how exactly to do it, they agree that winter needs some kind of ritual. And as you keep walking, you sense the next shift waiting just ahead. Because if the calendar is messy now, the streets are about to get even messier. The season's public face is not always gentle, and you're about to step into the kind of Christmas energy that makes you grateful for modern locks, modern lighting, and the fact that your neighbors cannot legally demand pie from you at midnight. You step into a Christmas week that feels like it has had too much coffee and not enough supervision. The air is still cold, the nights still long, but now there is movement, noise. Groups of people who look like they are treating winter as an excuse to get weird. You're walking toward the rowdy version of the holiday, the one that has less to do with Silent Night and more to do with who thought this was a good idea. The street is narrow and muddy where the snow has half melted into slush. Lantern light swings from doorways. A tavern spills warmth and laughter into the dark like it cannot help itself. You smell ale, smoke, and the sharp tang of sweat trapped under wool coats. Somewhere a fiddle is being played slightly too enthusiastically, which is a real talent, honestly. This is the part of the 19th century Christmas story that modern America later tries to tidy up. The season can be a time of public revelry, and that revelry can be rough. Not everyone participates, but everyone is aware of it. You see respectable families pulling their curtains tighter, hoping the noise stays on the other side of the glass. A mainstream historical fact holds the scene steady. In the early 19th century, Christmas in some American cities and towns is associated with public disorder, including drinking, street gangs, and what people of the time call misrule, a temporary loosening of social norms. This is not universal, but it is common enough that newspapers, clergy, and reformers complain about it. They want Christmas to become quieter, more improving, more domesticated. But right now, you're standing in the middle of the chaos that makes them complain. You watch a group of young men weaving down the street in a pack, their voices bouncing off buildings. They are not singing sweetly. They are chanting, jeering, laughing. They knock on a door and shout for drink. The homeowner cracks it open cautiously, like they are negotiating with a storm. Sometimes the homeowner gives in with a bottle or a few coins because generosity is safer than refusal. Sometimes the homeowner refuses and the pack moves on, but not always. Before someone mutters a threat wrapped in tradition, you feel the social hierarchy in this moment. The holiday becomes an opportunity for the lower classes, the young, the restless, the excluded, to press against the boundaries of respectability. It is a release valve. It is also a power play. Those who usually have to obey suddenly get a night where they can demand. Those who usually command suddenly have to appease. Historians still argue whether this rowdy Christmas is primarily a holdover from older European customs of seasonal misrule, or whether it is shaped by the specific tensions of rapidly growing American cities, where class divides and crowded neighborhoods create new kinds of conflict. You can see both in the way the crowd moves. The energy feels old, like a ritual, but the setting feels modern, like urban pressure building. You drift toward the tavern, not because you want trouble, but because that is where the sound is thickest. Inside, the heat hits your face like a slap. People are packed close, mugs raised, cheeks red. A man stands on a bench telling a story that gets less true with every sentence, and everyone loves it anyway. You realize this is one of the core functions of holiday revelry. It makes the long winter feel shorter. It makes loneliness less sharp. It gives people a reason to laugh loudly when the world is otherwise quiet and hard. A quirky tidbit slips in, and it is the kind of thing that makes you blink. In some places, groups would engage in masking or disguise during holiday misrule. wearing costumes or masks to blur identity. The anonymity makes mischief easier. It also turns the street into theater. You can feel the thrill of it. You can also feel why authorities hate it. Nothing scares a town leader like a crowd you cannot individually shame. Joke 1. You imagine trying to pull this off today and getting immediately defeated by street lights, security cameras, and a neighbor's doorbell recording your entire festive misrule moment in crisp HD. Joke 2. You picture a masked reveler from 1820 encountering a modern HOA and realizing the true horror of bureaucracy. Joke 3. You realize the only misrule most of us tolerate now is eating cookies for breakfast and calling it self-care. Outside again. The night grows louder. You hear shouting. A window rattles from a thrown snowball or maybe something heavier. You catch a glimpse of a group tugging at a gate, testing it, laughing as it creaks. You do not see full-scale violence in front of you, but you feel the edge of it. The holiday can sharpen emotions. Alcohol and winter cabin fever are not exactly a calming combination. This is also where the social reformers start sharpening their pencils. Metaphorically, you can sense, even without hearing their speeches, that people in positions of influence are increasingly uncomfortable with Christmas as a public free-for-all. They want to shift the celebration indoors, into homes, into family circles, into controlled rituals that do not involve strangers pounding on your door at midnight demanding your best cider. And honestly, you get it. You step into a quieter side street where a family home glows with a calmer kind of light. Through the window, you see a small gathering. They are not out there with the crowd. They are staying safe, keeping the holiday contained. The children are sleepy. The adults look tired but determined to make the night feel peaceful. The contrast is striking. Christmas is splitting into two versions, public chaos and a private comfort. Historians still argue whether this split is the key turning point that produces the modern American Christmas. Some argue that the domestication of Christmas is a deliberate project by middle-class reformers, writers, and clergy. Others argue it is a natural response to urbanization and social strain, with families seeking refuge in the home. Standing here, you can feel the home as refuge. You can also feel how refuge becomes an ideal, something people start to romanticize. You return to the main street and notice another layer. People are watching each other, not just enjoying themselves, but observing. Who is out tonight? Who is sober? Who is participating? Who is avoiding the crowd? These observations become social currency later. The holiday is not just celebration, it is a social mirror. You pause near a lamppost and listen. The soundscape is complicated. Laughter, music, shouting, the clop of a horse, a baby crying somewhere inside a house, the crackle of a fire in a nearby hearth. It feels alive, but also uneasy. This is not yet the sanitized Christmas you know. It is a season that still carries the older human impulse toward carnival. And you begin to understand why a figure like Santa will eventually be so powerful. Santa is a way to channel this energy, to replace the crowd with a single, friendly intruder, to turn demands into gifts, to move the action from streets to hearths, to make the holiday feel safe, especially for children, and especially for the kind of families who would prefer not to negotiate with drunken revelers. As you walk away from the tavern, you feel the cold reclaim your face. The noise fades behind you, but the memory sticks. Christmas before Santa is not just quieter and stranger. It can be rough. It can be a little scary. It can be the kind of night where you learn to keep your head down and your door bolted. And yet, even in the chaos, you sense something human and familiar. People are desperate for warmth, for community, for a break in the grind. They are just expressing it in a way that has not been domesticated yet. not softened, not packaged. You keep walking, and you can feel the next tradition waiting right ahead, that door-to-door pressure, that seasonal begging dressed up as ritual. Because if tonight is rowdy, the next stop is where the holiday knocks directly on your door and asks what you're going to do about it. You hear it before you see it. Footsteps in a loose chorus. Voices swelling and dipping. The scrape of boots on frozen ruts, and then the unmistakable sound of someone testing your patience on purpose. A knock that is just a little too confident, not polite, not timid. The kind of knock that assumes you will open the door because tradition says so. Welcome to Christmasing. You're standing on the inside of a house now, close to the hearth, where the warmth is pooled like a secret. The family has been trying to keep the night calm. Someone has just set down a bowl. Someone has just shushed a child. The air smells like baked something and damp wool drying by the fire. And then that knock comes again, followed by laughter outside, and you can practically feel everyone's shoulders tighten at the exact same time. This is not trick-or-treating. Not exactly. But you can see the family mentally flipping through options the way you flip through streaming menus. Ignore it, answer it, pretend you're not home, or bribe the situation into leaving. A mainstream historical fact settles in. In parts of the Anglo-American world, including areas of the United States, holiday customs included door-to-door visiting where groups asked for food, drink, or small gifts. A practice related to older English traditions like wassailing and mumming, and later American variations sometimes called Christmasing. It could be friendly, but it could also carry a hint of threat, especially when rowdy groups felt entitled to rewards for their holiday cheer. The door opens, and cold air pours in like an uninvited opinion. Outside stands a small crowd. Some are smiling, some are swaying, some are wearing expressions that say, "We are here for the snacks and we have time." They sing or shout a short verse, sometimes truly musical, sometimes more like a chant from a sports crowd. They hold out hands. They gesture toward your pantry like it owes them money. And here is the thing. In a tight community, refusing is complicated. Charity is expected. Hospitality is prized. And if you are seen as stingy, you might carry that reputation like a stain for the rest of the year. So even if you do not like this tradition, you might still hand over something. A mug of cider, a slice of pie, a coin, a hunk of cake. Anything to keep the exchange smooth, to keep the holiday from turning into a small war. You watch the homeowner offer food with a smile that looks stapled on. The crowd cheers, not with deep gratitude but with the satisfaction of success. They move on to the next house. The door closes. The warm room exhales. Joke one arrives gently. You realize this is basically the original subscription model, except instead of paying for ad-free content, you're paying so strangers do not sing at you aggressively in the cold. Joke 2. You imagine trying to explain this to a modern delivery driver and watching their face slowly shut down. Joke 3. You realize your own survival instincts would make you the most generous person on the block, and you would call it holiday spirit while quietly shaking. Outside, you follow the crowd at a careful distance. They move from house to house with the confidence of people who know the script. Sometimes they are welcomed warmly, especially if they are neighbors or relatives. Sometimes they are tolerated. Sometimes they are chased off. The vibe changes street by street, town by town, and even house by house, depending on class, religion, and local custom. In wealthier neighborhoods, the tradition can become more structured and less threatening. Visitors might be invited in for a drink, a song, a short social call. It becomes an opportunity to reinforce community bonds. But in poor or more tense areas, the line between festive visiting and intimidation blurs. It is not always malicious. Often it is hunger plus winter plus tradition, but the effect can still feel like pressure. A quirky tidbit slips in, the kind that makes you glance over your shoulder. Some groups would incorporate playful rhymes that included mild threats, the idea being that generosity would be rewarded with blessings and stinginess with mischief. The language could be joking, but the social logic was real. Bless us with food and drink, or we might bless you with chaos. You think about modern holiday caroling and realize it is the sanitized descendant of this, like a wolf that learned to wear a choir robe. Historians still argue whether traditions like Christmasing were primarily about reciprocal community care or about class tension expressed through ritual. Again, you can feel both. When the visitors are children or neighbors, it feels sweet, like shared winter survival. When the visitors are older boys with too much confidence and too little restraint, it feels like a social shakedown disguised as a song. You notice how the household prepares. Some families set aside a plate of treats specifically for this purpose, like a bribe budget. Others leave a candle lit and hope that signals welcome, or signals we are awake and ready, which is not always a good thing. Others darken the house, pretending to be asleep, which is the 19th century version of turning off your porch light on Halloween. You watch a family move quietly, whispering as they blow out a lamp, and you feel their relief when the crowd passes by without stopping. It is not just food and drink. Sometimes it is also about status. If you give generously, you prove you are respectable, capable, charitable. If you refuse, you risk becoming the story told at the tavern later, the miser who would not share at Christmas. Reputation travels fast in small communities, and winter nights give people a lot of time to talk. You also start to see how this door-to-door dynamic nudges Christmas toward the private sphere. People who dislike the pressure begin to prefer a holiday that stays inside the family circle, a holiday that does not involve strangers at the threshold. This is part of why later reformers will push for Christmas to become domesticated and child-centered. A child asking sweetly for a cookie is easier to tolerate than a crowd of adults demanding cider like it is a constitutional right. You move through a street where the tradition has softened. Here, a group of children approaches a door with shy singing, cheeks red, noses running. The homeowner laughs and hands them little treats, maybe fruit or small cakes. The children giggle and run off, and suddenly the custom looks adorable. You can feel how easily this could be romanticized later. You can also feel how different it is when the visitors are drunk men at midnight. Historians still argue whether the sweetening of Christmas traditions happens naturally as childhood becomes more sentimentalized in the 19th century, or whether it is actively promoted by writers and middle-class reformers who want to reshape public behavior. You do not have to pick a side to see the outcome. The child version wins over time. The adult intimidation version becomes something people want to forget or reframe. You return to the hearth again. And now the family is preparing for potential knocks, like soldiers fortifying a border. They put away the nicest food. They keep a small plate of acceptable offerings ready. They listen for footsteps. The holiday, in this moment, feels less like peace and more like managed risk. And yet, even here, there is an undercurrent of generosity. Winter is hard. People know others are hungry. Sharing food is not only obligation, but sometimes genuine care. A family might give more than they can afford because they remember being on the other side of the door. The holiday carries that tension too. Kindness and pressure tangled together as you sit close to the fire. You can almost feel the future pressing in. Christmas is being negotiated at the doorstep. Literally. What kind of holiday will this become? One where strangers demand, or one where families give willingly, especially to children? One where the street rules, or one where the hearth rules. The knocking fades into the distance, replaced by the steady crackle of firewood. Someone in the room finally relaxes, letting their shoulders drop. Someone laughs, softly, about how they survived another round of Christmasing. And you realize, with a sleepy little shiver, that the hearth is not just warmth, it is a boundary, a line between the chaotic winter world and the private pocket of comfort people are starting to crave. And in that craving, the next layer of tradition begins to glow, the older folk rituals by the fire, the omens, the superstitions, the quiet magic people practice when the door is finally shut. The door's finally bolted, and the house does that small, satisfying thing a home does when it becomes a fortress again. The wind can hiss all it wants out there. The street can keep its footsteps and its demands. In here, the air is thick with smoke-sweet warmth, and the fire becomes the center of everything. You sit close enough to feel your cheeks loosen, close enough to hear the logs settle and crack like they are whispering secrets in a language made of heat. This is where the holiday turns inward. Not just socially, but spiritually in a quieter, older way. Because before Christmas becomes mostly about a man in a red suit and a morning of presents, winter celebrations are often about the hearth itself, about light holding back darkness, about ritual that makes you feel like you have some control over the cold months that keep trying to win. A mainstream historical fact anchors the scene. Many 19th-century American Christmas practices blend Christian observance with older European folk customs carried over through immigration and regional tradition. And hearth-centered rituals are a common theme in winter celebrations. Even when people do not call it folk magic, they still do things that look a lot like it. Symbolic gestures, special foods, superstitions about luck, and small rites meant to protect the household. You watch as someone brings in a big log, heavier than the usual firewood, and sets it near the hearth like a guest of honor. Maybe it is not called a Yule log in this household. Maybe it is just the big one, but the gesture is the same. It is meant to burn long, to last through the night, to give the room a steady glow that feels like reassurance. The log's bark is rough under your fingers if you touch it, cold from the outside, but you can almost imagine the warmth trapped inside waiting to be released. They push it into the fire, coax it to catch, and the flames take hold slowly, licking and climbing. The room fills with that deep, resinous scent that makes your brain go quiet. Somebody mutters something about keeping the fire going for luck. Somebody else says it with a half-smile, like they do not want to admit they believe it. But they do. At least a little. A quirky tidbit slips in. In some households, people hold on to bits of ash or a charred fragment of a special log as a token of protection or luck, sometimes mixing it into next year's fire or keeping it as a charm. You can almost see someone tucking a little blackened piece into a drawer like it is both meaningless and deeply important. It is superstition, sure, but it is also a way to say, we made it through the dark again. We will do it again. Historians still argue whether these folk practices remain widespread in America throughout the 19th century, or whether they survive mostly as scattered regional habits that later get romanticized. Sitting here, you feel the truth. People do not always announce their rituals. They just do them, quietly, casually, the way you might knock on wood without thinking. Then pretend you did not. The hearth has its own rules. If you are lucky, it is the warmest place in the house. If you are unlucky, it is also the smokiest. Someone stirs a pot that has been simmering for hours, and the steam smells like herbs and fat and something sweet. The adults talk about the year, about who traveled, who did not, who's expected to visit tomorrow if the roads stay passable. The kids fidget and stare at the fire like it is a movie that never ends. You listen as someone mentions weather signs, a ring around the moon, a sudden thaw, a wind that shifted oddly. Winter makes people into amateur meteorologists and accidental poets. And then, inevitably, someone connects it to luck. A good sign, a bad sign. A sign that means you should not start a journey on a certain day. The season is full of these little rules that make people feel less helpless. Joke 1. You realize your modern equivalent is checking 3 different weather apps, then still going outside unprepared, then acting betrayed by the sky. Joke 2. You picture a 19th century person trying to refresh the forecast by staring harder at the clouds. Joke 3. You suspect half these omens were invented by someone who simply wanted an excuse to stay home, which honestly is relatable. Near the hearth, someone brings out a bowl of something special. Maybe it is a spiced drink. Maybe it is a pudding-like dessert. Maybe it is just bread with a bit more sugar than usual. The act of making it is ritual too. Ingredients are precious in winter. Treats mean planning. They mean stored fruit, preserved spices, maybe a bit of rum or brandy if you're in a place where that is common. When people say Christmas cheer, sometimes they mean literal alcohol, and you can smell it in the warmth rising from the cup. You notice how the household uses light. Candles are not scattered for decoration. They are placed where they matter, on a table where people gather, near a corner where someone reads. Each flame is small, but it feels significant. Darkness is not just aesthetic here. It is a real presence. Lighting a candle is both practical and symbolic. It says, "This is our circle. This is where we exist tonight." As the fire settles into a steady burn, conversation drifts toward stories. Stories are another kind of winter magic, and they do not need to be true to be useful. Someone tells a tale about a traveler caught in a snowstorm, saved by a stranger. Someone else tells a story that sounds like a ghost story, but insists it really happened to a cousin's neighbor's friend, which is the 19th century version of "I saw it on the internet." The kids lean in, eyes wide. The adults pretend not to enjoy it, but they do. Here's another mainstream historical fact that fits like a glove. The 19th century is a period where printed stories, poems, and moral tales about Christmas begin to circulate more widely, shaping how people imagine the season. But in the home, oral storytelling still matters. It is how families pass down values, warnings, and humor. It is how they turn the long night into something shared. Historians still argue whether the rise of printed Christmas literature replaces these folk patterns or simply absorbs them, translating hearth magic into sentimental narrative. Again, you can feel both. The story someone tells by the fire might have come from a book, or it might have come from a grandparent, or it might be a mashup of both. Tradition is not a museum piece. It is a stew, simmering and changing depending on who is stirring. You watch as someone quietly does a small, almost invisible gesture. Maybe they throw a pinch of salt into the fire. Maybe they cross themselves before eating. Maybe they place an evergreen sprig above the mantel. Each act is tiny, but together they create a sense that the night is special. Guarded, marked, outside. The wind picks up, rattling the shutters. The house creaks like it is settling its own bones. The sound could be unsettling, but the fire makes it feel contained. You lean back, letting the warmth soften your eyelids. The room's shadows flicker gently, making the walls look alive in a slow, sleepy way. In this moment, Christmas feels less like a date and more like a practice, a way of enduring, a way of claiming comfort without needing spectacle. The hearth is the original holiday centerpiece, and you can sense why. It is warmth and light and story all in one. It is a place where superstitions can hide in plain sight, where faith and folkways can coexist without arguing too loudly. And as you sit there, you begin to notice another shift that is about to change everything. The way people start bringing nature indoors, not just as a scent, but as decoration, evergreens, boughs, and that flirtatious little menace known as mistletoe are waiting just around the corner of the century, ready to turn the home into a living symbol of winter. The next time you step into a home during this season, you catch it immediately. The air smells greener. Not just smoke and stew and wet wool, but that crisp, resinous scent that makes you think of forests and cold sap and needles crushed under boots. You look up and see it, too. A bough of evergreen pinned over a doorway. A little bundle of a holly tucked near the mantel. Maybe a wreath shape. Maybe not yet fully standardized into the perfect circle you're used to. But definitely greenery brought inside on purpose. It feels like the house is trying to remind itself what life smells like. A mainstream historical fact settles in. Bringing evergreens indoors during winter is a long-standing tradition in many European cultures and in 19th century America, especially as immigration continues and cultural blending accelerates. The use of evergreen boughs, holly and other winter plants becomes more common as seasonal decoration. It is not uniform across the country, but it is spreading, and you can feel it spreading like the scent itself, quietly but persistently. You run your fingers along a sprig of pine. The needles are sharp, alive, almost defiant. Evergreens are nature's little winter flecks. Everything else looks dead, and they're out here staying green like they didn't get the memo. That's joke one, and it lands softly because it's true. Joke two shows up when you imagine a 19th century person proudly decorating with greenery, only to discover later that they also brought in a few spiders as bonus guests. Joke three is a quiet one. You realize that half of modern holiday decor is just people trying to recreate the exact emotional comfort that pine scent gives you, but with artificial candles labeled Winter Cabin Whisper or something. The decor isn't just pretty. It carries meaning, even if people don't always say it out loud. Green in winter suggests endurance, continuity, hope. Some people frame it in Christian symbolism, life persisting through darkness. Others treat it as simple tradition. Others just like that, it makes the room smell less like smoke and existential dread. And then there's the mistletoe. You see it hanging from a beam or in a doorway, sometimes as part of a larger kissing bough arrangement that includes holly, evergreen, ribbons, maybe even small fruit. It looks innocent enough, but you can feel the social electricity around it. People glance at it. People pretend not to glance at it. People position themselves under it like they're just passing through, which is the most suspicious phrase in any century. A quirky tidbit slides in with a grin. Mistletoe has older associations in European folklore, including beliefs about luck, fertility, and protection. And by the 19th century, in some American communities, it becomes linked to playful courtship customs, including kissing. The practice is not everywhere yet, and it doesn't always look like the modern cliché. But you can see the roots forming. A holiday that is becoming more domestic also needs a little sanctioned mischief. And mistletoe is basically mischief on a string. Historians still argue whether these greenery traditions spread mostly through immigrant influence, especially German and British customs, or through the rising popularity of printed images and stories that show what a proper Christmas home should look like. Standing here, you can see both. A German family might bring in greenery because it's what they've always done. A neighbor might copy it because it looks lovely and because someone in a magazine said it's festive. The home becomes a place where tradition can be imported and then reinvented. You watch a family arrange a holly branch, careful of the prickly leaves. There's something intimate about it, Decorating is a form of shared labor, and shared labor builds feeling. Children are enlisted, and they do it with the chaotic enthusiasm children bring to everything, including accidentally poking themselves. Adults try to guide without crushing the excitement. The whole thing is quieter than street revelry, but it has its own energy. This is part of the bigger transformation happening in the century. Christmas is gradually moving indoors, away from rowdy streets and toward the domestic ideal. Greenery is perfect for that shift. It's a visual signal. This home is participating. This home is warm. This home is safe. Or at least, it wants to appear that way. You notice how the decorations vary by region and class. In a modest home, it might just be a few sprigs gathered nearby, because evergreens are accessible if you live near trees. In a wealthier home, there may be more elaborate arrangements, perhaps purchased, perhaps arranged with more care and extra ribbon. Either way, the act is similar. You are bringing the outside in, making winter feel less barren. The scent changes the mood. You can feel it. People breathe deeper. The room feels more alive. Even the fire seems to burn more cheerfully, as if it appreciates the company of something green. You also sense the way greenery intersects with social rules. In a household that leans strict, the decorations might be restrained, purposeful, no nonsense. In a more playful household, the kissing bough becomes a stage prop for teasing and flirtation. Someone steers a shy couple under it. Someone makes a joke too loud. Someone blushes and pretends they are offended while clearly enjoying it. And through it all, there's that underlying question scholars keep circling. What is driving this gentler Christmas? Is it a moral reform project to tame public disorder? Is it the influence of romantic literature that idealizes home and hearth? Is it immigrant tradition? Is it all of the above? Historians still argue whether the domestication of Christmas is primarily cultural evolution or social engineering. And the answer seems to change depending on which parlor you're standing in. You step into a small gathering where people are dressed a bit finer than usual. A visitor admires the greenery, complimenting the scent, the arrangement. Compliments are currency here. They reinforce social bonds. They also reinforce norms. If everyone praises evergreen decor, more people will do it next year. This is how traditions spread, not always by decree, but by approval. You glance again at the mistletoe, and you watch a young man pause beneath it, pretending to adjust his collar. A young woman steps near, pretending to fix a ribbon. The room hums with quiet anticipation. Someone coughs theatrically. Someone else laughs. The kiss, if it happens, is brief, chaste, socially acceptable precisely because the plant made them do it. You can almost hear the future writing itself. The holiday needs rituals that allow affection without scandal. And mistletoe is a loophole hanging from a ceiling. Outside, the night is still cold, still dark, but inside, between greenery and firelight, the world feels softened. It feels more like a place you can endure. You begin to see how sensory details are becoming part of the holiday's power. Smell, light, warmth, texture. The season is learning how to comfort people. And you can feel the next hunger rising, literal and metaphorical. Because after you decorate, you eat. After you scent the air with evergreen, you scent it with roasting and baking. The holiday's domestic turn is not complete without the table, without the specific foods that say, "This night matters," even if the pantry is tight and the winter is long. So you linger one more moment beneath the boughs, letting pine and smoke mix in your breath, and you follow the household's attention toward the kitchen, where something warm is about to be served, and where Christmas starts to taste like tradition. You follow the scent like it's a rope leading you through the house. It starts as a background warmth and then becomes specific. Fat sizzling, spice blooming, bread baking, something sweet caramelizing at the edge of a pot. The kitchen is the true holiday altar. And everyone knows it, even if they pretend the parlor is the main stage. Winter has a way of making food feel louder. Every smell is amplified. Every hot dish feels like a small act of defiance against the cold. And in 19th century America, Christmas food is not just about indulgence. It is about logistics, preservation, seasonality. Who has what stored away? Who has money for extras? Who has time to cook? A mainstream historical fact settles in with the steady clink of utensils. Christmas feasting in the 19th century often draws on what is available locally and what can be preserved through winter. And foods like roast meats, pies, puddings, and seasonal staples become associated with the holiday in many regions, though the menu varies widely by class and geography. There is no single national Christmas dinner yet. There are patterns, but they are flexible. You step into a coastal town kitchen and the smell hits different. There is brine in the air, that clean, sharp ocean note. Oysters are everywhere. Because oysters in the 19th century are astonishingly common. They are cheap in many places, abundant, and they show up at holiday tables as something both practical and celebratory. You watch them being shucked, shells cracking open with wet little pops. The sound is oddly satisfying, like tiny winter doors opening. Then you step into an inland kitchen and it changes again. Here, the feast is built from stored roots, dried fruit, salted meat, and whatever the family butchered before winter tightened its grip. A roast might be the centerpiece if they can afford it. If not, maybe it's a stew, made rich with time more than with expensive ingredients. Bread is essential, not ornamental. Pies appear where they can, often filled with dried apples or mincemeat. And mincemeat can mean what it sounds like in older recipes, a mixture of meat, suet, dried fruit, and spices. A dense, sweet, savory thing that makes modern people blink and ask, "Wait, meat in dessert?" Yes. You are in the past now. Hold on to your emotional support, cinnamon. Joke 1. You imagine bringing a mincemeat pie to a modern holiday potluck and watching everyone politely take one bite and then quietly reach for the cookies. Joke 2. You picture a 19th century cook hearing about gluten-free and just staring into the middle distance. Joke 3. You realize the true timeless Christmas tradition is standing in a warm kitchen pretending you're helping while actually just hunting for snacks. The food tells you who has power. In wealthier homes, there's more variety, more sugar, more imported spice. The table might display oranges or nuts like small luxuries, objects that say, "We are connected to trade. We can afford sweetness in winter." In poorer homes, the specialness is quieter. Maybe it's just a slightly bigger portion. Maybe it's the one day they use a precious bit of spice. Maybe it's the day the bread is white instead of darker. Because refined flour costs more and signals occasion. A quirky tidbit slips in as you watch someone stir a pot of pudding. In some households, holiday puddings or cakes include small objects baked inside, like a coin or ring, and whoever finds it is said to get luck or a prediction for the year. It's a playful way to bring fortune-telling into dessert, without admitting you're doing fortune-telling. You can feel the hush of anticipation as the dish is served. Everyone chews carefully, partly for luck, partly because you do not want to bite down on a coin like you're trying to crack a walnut with your teeth. Historians still argue whether these food customs spread mainly through print culture and popular cookbooks, or through oral tradition and immigrant practice. Standing here, you can see both again. A mother might make something because her mother made it. A neighbor might make something because a newspaper described it as fashionable. A new cookbook might propose a proper Christmas meal, and households might imitate it as much as they can afford, even if their version is humbler. You sit at the table as the meal begins. The room is warm, crowded, and the conversation flows differently than it did on ordinary nights. There's more laughter, more storytelling, more leaning in. Food does that. It makes people linger. It stretches time, and you notice how the holiday meal doubles as social glue. If guests come, the table is where relationships are managed. Compliments are exchanged. News is shared. Small tensions are smoothed over by passing a dish and saying, "Here, have more." Even a family that barely speaks on other nights finds itself talking more because the shared act of eating feels like a shared agreement to be human. But you also notice what is missing. There's not necessarily a mountain of sweets or dessert table that looks like a pastry shop. Sugar is still not cheap everywhere. Baking is labor-intensive, and the kitchen is not a background zone. It's the engine of the day. Someone has been working for hours, maybe days, to make this happen. The holiday is restful for some and exhausting for others. That's part of the unspoken reality behind the warmth. You see children watching the food with wide eyes, not because they expect piles of gifts later, but because this feast itself is the special thing. A second helping is a holiday miracle. A cookie is a treat with real weight. An orange can feel like treasure. A mainstream historical fact sharpens the point. Before mass consumer culture and widespread gift-giving norms, holiday specialness often centers on meals, hospitality, and shared time, with gifts being modest and sometimes absent, depending on the household. The feast is the gift in many places. Historians still argue whether the later explosion of gift-giving supplants this food-centered holiday or simply adds another layer on top. Sitting here, tasting salt and spice and slow-cooked warmth, you suspect it's both. Food remains central, but the cultural spotlight will shift. In a few decades, the table will share its throne with the tree, with wrapped packages, with the idea that Christmas morning is the main event. For now, though, the meal ends with satisfied silence, plates scraped clean, hands warmed around mugs, a few crumbs caught in the corners of smiles. People lean back, heavy with comfort, letting the fire and the food do their slow work. And as the dishes are cleared, you feel the next question forming, the one that will start reshaping the holiday's emotional center. What do you give? Not just food, not just hospitality, but gifts, practical ones, modest ones, meaningful ones, the kind that don't come from a North Pole workshop, but from a household calculating what it can spare. After the meal, the house has that soft, drowsy glow of satisfaction. People move slower. Voices drop. Someone stares into the fire like it's telling them tomorrow's weather. You can feel the holiday settling, like flour dust after baking. And now you notice what isn't happening. Nobody is dramatically dragging in a tower of wrapped boxes. No one is arranging color-coordinated gift piles like it's an interior design project. Nobody is whispering about a big surprise that required online tracking numbers and a prayer to the shipping goods. Gifts exist, yes, but in this moment of the 19th century, they are not yet the centerpiece they will become. A mainstream historical fact lands with quiet certainty. In many parts of 19th century America, gift-giving at Christmas is modest and not always universal, often focused on practical items or small tokens. And in some places, gift-giving traditions are more associated with New Year's Day than Christmas Day. The idea of a major, child-focused gift explosion on December 25th is still forming, and it varies widely by region, class, and cultural background. You sit near the hearth and watch a parent hand a child something small. Maybe it's a knitted cap. Maybe it's a simple book with worn edges. Maybe it's a little carved toy. Not glossy, not perfect, but clearly made with time and care. The child's reaction isn't the squealing crescendo you expect from modern holiday videos. It's quieter, but it's real. They hold the item like it matters because it does. It's useful. It's theirs. In a world where many things are shared, passed down, or simply absent, a personal object is a kind of luxury. You realize quickly that practicality is not a lack of love here. It is love adapted to winter and budgets. Someone receives a pair of gloves. Someone receives a piece of fabric. Someone receives a tool, a small knife, a sewing kit, a warm shawl, a little tin of something special. Each gift is a message. I see what you need. I want you to be okay. I want your hands to stay warm. I want your work to be easier. It's tenderness translated into utility. Joke 1. You imagine telling your modern self you're getting a really nice piece of fabric for Christmas and watching your face try to hide disappointment, only to realize you'd actually love it if it meant you could repair your favorite jacket forever. Joke 2. You picture a 19th century kid being handed a limited edition collectible and asking, "Does it keep me warm?" Joke 3. You realize the oldest Christmas wish list is basically, "Please help me not freeze." There are also gifts that aren't objects. Hospitality is a gift. A seat at the table is a gift. A visit is a gift. In many families, the holiday exchange is simply time and attention, with small treats offered as punctuation rather than plot. You step into a slightly wealthier home and see more variety. Here, sugar and spices appear as presents. Maybe imported tea. Maybe a fancy ribbon. Maybe a small piece of jewelry. The gifts are still not extravagant by modern standards, but they carry a glow of status. Giving something rare signals not just affection, but connection to trade networks and money. The gift becomes a social statement. A quirky tidbit slips in. Some people exchange homemade gifts in the form of handwritten verses, small, crafted items, or personalized tokens that are meant to show refinement and sentiment rather than cost. A little poem tucked into a book, a hand-embroidered sampler, a carved wooden trinket. You can almost see the pride in the giver's face. I made this. I spent time. I shaped my feelings into something you can hold. Historians still argue whether the growth of Christmas gift-giving is driven more by changing ideas about childhood and family intimacy, or by the rise of consumer goods and advertising that steadily teach people to equate love with purchase. Sitting here, you can see the early stages of both. The gifts are modest, but the emotional logic is expanding. Giving is becoming a way to define the holiday, and children are starting to occupy more space in that definition. You notice, too, that some families still treat New Year's as the more prominent gift moment. People might save their best exchange for January 1st, when social visiting and calls are more structured, especially in certain urban settings. In that sense, Christmas is still negotiating its role. Is it the big day, or is it one day in a broader season of visiting, feasting, and social ritual? The answer depends on where you stand. In some communities, gifts are tied to St. Nicholas traditions, especially among immigrants who brought those practices from Europe. In others, gifts are tied to church charity, where the needy receive clothing or food. In others, gifts are simply not part of the holiday at all, or they are so small they barely register as an exchange in the modern sense. You watch a child receive an apple and a handful of nuts. The child smiles like they just got treasure. That moment hits you harder than it should. It's a reminder that excitement isn't about quantity. It's about meaning. It's about scarcity. It's about a world where fruit in winter feels like a bright miracle. A mainstream historical fact threads through this. The 19th century sees changing attitudes toward children. with increasing emphasis on childhood innocence and the home as a moral center. And those shifts help push Christmas toward becoming more child-focused over time. That's the slope you're standing on. It's not steep yet, but it's there. Historians still argue whether this child-centered shift is a genuine emotional transformation or a cultural project shaped by reformers who want to tame public disorder by redirecting energy toward domestic life. Again, you can feel the dual purpose. Gifts make children happy. Yes, but gifts also keep families indoors. They keep the holiday quiet. They keep the night from turning into street chaos. As the evening deepens, someone brings out a small bundle wrapped in plain paper. No shiny ribbon, just string. The recipient unwraps it slowly, careful not to tear the paper too much because paper is not to be wasted. Inside is something simple: a scarf, a book, a small tool. The room nods with approval. Not because it's flashy, but because it's thoughtful. And you notice the emotional tone. Gratitude is expressed, but not theatrically. People may not say, "Oh my gosh, you shouldn't have," with the modern sing-song performance. They might say, "Thank you, this will be useful," which, honestly, is the most sincere compliment of all in a winter that punishes unpreparedness. You let that sink in as the fire crackles. Christmas here is not yet a shopping frenzy. It's a negotiation between warmth and scarcity, between obligation and affection, between old customs and new sentimental ideals. And now, in the quiet after the small gifts, you feel the next thread tighten, because there are whispers of an older figure, a sainted visitor, a name carried by immigrant tongues and local memory, a figure who is not yet Santa, but who will become the seed of him. You're about to follow that seed into Dutch New York echoes and the half-formed legend of St. Nicholas. You move eastward in your mind and in your footsteps, towards streets where languages mix and where the smell of the harbor clings to everything like a damp scarf. New York is growing, changing, swelling with people and ambition, and inside that noisy expansion, you find pockets of older tradition tucked away like heirlooms. You hear it in family chatter, in accented vowels, in names that carry history. One name keeps surfacing, not shouted from rooftops, not printed on every greeting card, but spoken with a kind of familiar certainty: St. Nicholas, or, in Dutch mouths, something closer to Sinterklaas. A mainstream historical fact settles in. Dutch communities in and around New York preserve traditions connected to St. Nicholas, a Christian saint associated with generosity. And these traditions, along with broader European influences, contribute to the development of what will become the American Santa Claus figure over the 19th century. It is not a straight line. It is a braided rope of stories, jokes, and cultural remixing. You step into a Dutch-influenced household and feel the difference in atmosphere. There's still the hearth, still the winter practicality, but there's also an older, more specific sense of seasonal ritual. The adults mention St. Nicholas not as a vague symbol, but as a character with expectations, a visitor, a figure who might reward good behavior, a figure who might bring small gifts. You see children hovering, half skeptical, half hopeful, as if they're trying to decide whether this is real or just another adult trick. And here, the gift moment feels slightly more focused. Not huge, not overflowing, but directed. Like the holiday is beginning to aim itself at childhood. You notice how the adults handle the story. They do not always present it as literal truth, but they also do not dismiss it. It sits in that delicious middle zone where myth can work. St. Nicholas becomes a moral whisper. Behave. Be kind. Help others. Or at least, Stop biting your sibling. Because the saint is allegedly paying attention. Joke 1. You realize Saint Nicholas is basically the original parental surveillance system, except the only camera is your own guilt and your mother's eyebrows. Joke 2. You picture a Dutch child hearing, "He sees you when you're sleeping," and immediately deciding to never sleep again out of protest. Joke 3. You imagine telling a modern kid, "A saint on a horse is coming," and they respond, "Cool, what's his Wi-Fi password?" But you also notice something important. The Saint Nicholas tradition is not uniform even within these communities. Some treat it as a separate celebration with its own date and customs. Others blend it into Christmas time. Some keep it strong. Others let it fade as they assimilate into broader American culture. The tradition is alive, but it is not yet national. A quirky tidbit slips in as you listen to older family members reminisce. In the early 1800s, some American writers and cultural figures deliberately romanticized Dutch New York traditions, using them in stories that shape how the public imagines Saint Nicholas. These aren't neutral descriptions. They're cultural storytelling, turning old New York into a charming, mythic past. You can feel the way nostalgia works like a force multiplier. People love a tradition more when it feels ancient and cozy, even if it's been edited for effect. Historians still argue whether the Santa Claus that emerges is authentically rooted in Dutch practice or whether Dutch influence is exaggerated by writers who wanted a distinctive American origin story. Standing here, you can see why the argument persists. The Dutch traditions matter, yes, but they are also being reframed through English-language storytelling and urban culture. The legend is being built in public, like a house with many contractors who don't fully agree on the blueprint. You walk along a street where shops are beginning to display seasonal goods, though not yet in the dazzling way that will come later. You see a toy in a window, a doll, a little carved horse, items that suggest childhood as a market is beginning to exist. And as childhood becomes more sentimentalized, a gift-bringer figure becomes more useful. It gives a narrative reason to buy things. It gives a moral reason to give things. It gives adults a way to turn generosity into theater. You hear a conversation in a tavern, too, where Saint Nicholas is mentioned with a wink. Not everyone treats him as sacred. Some use him as a symbol of old customs or as an excuse for storytelling. The saint becomes flexible, and that flexibility is key. Strict religious figures don't always love it, but popular culture does. A saint who can be playful is a saint who can travel farther. You step into a home where children leave something out, not cookies and milk exactly, but maybe a small offering, a shoe set by the hearth, a nod to older European patterns. It's not universal, but it's there. The children's faces are serious with ritual. They are participating in something that feels bigger than them. That feeling, that tiny shiver of wonder, is going to be the fuel for what comes next. A mainstream historical fact threads through the moment. The early 19th century is a period of intense cultural change and print expansion in America, with newspapers, pamphlets, and popular literature spreading ideas faster than before. That means a local tradition like St. Nicholas can be amplified. It can be standardized. It can be turned into an icon. The story can escape the neighborhood. Historians still argue whether the key invention of Santa Claus is less about folklore itself and more about the moment when folklore meets mass media. You can almost see the gears turning. A poem gets published, an illustration gets copied, a story gets retold with tweaks. A figure that was once regionally specific becomes broadly familiar. For now, St. Nicholas remains a kind of ghost in the room. He's present in certain homes, absent in others. He's a saint, a moral tale, a cultural memory, and a convenient excuse for small gifts. He's not yet the universally recognized Santa. His appearance is not fixed. His transportation is not standardized. He might arrive on foot, on horse, in a spiritual sense, or simply in the form of a parent leaving treats, but you can feel the inevitability building. America is hungry for a unifying Christmas character, something that can move the holiday away from street chaos and toward domestic wonder. Saint Nicholas is perfectly positioned to be reshaped into that, not because he was destined, but because the culture is ready for him. And you're about to watch the moment when a piece of writing snaps a bunch of these loose ideas into a more coherent picture. A poem, casually shared, that will end up doing heavy cultural lifting. The sleigh, the reindeer, the whole mood. You turn away from the harbor air and toward a quieter room where someone is reading aloud, and you feel the first outline of a famous night forming in the warm hush of candlelight. You step into a room where the winter wind can't reach, and the hush feels intentional, like everyone has agreed to hold still for a moment. Candlelight pools on a table. A child is curled near the hearth, eyes heavy but stubbornly awake. An adult clears their throat, not with the stern warning of a sermon, but with that theatrical little pause that says, "Okay, listen, I have something." Paper rustles, and then the words begin. You don't hear them as a classic yet. They aren't printed on mugs or embroidered on throw pillows. They're just a poem, recited like a shared secret. But you can feel the room change as it unfolds, because it gives the season something it desperately lacks. A clear, vivid image. A story you can picture instantly. A mainstream historical fact anchors the moment. In 1823, a poem commonly known as A Visit from St. Nicholas, often beginning with "'Twas the night before Christmas," is published and becomes enormously influential in shaping the American image of Santa Claus, popularizing details like a nocturnal visit, a sleigh, and reindeer. Whether the authorship is definitively settled in every mind is another matter, but the cultural impact is undeniable. Historians still argue whether Clement Clark Moore is the true author or whether Henry Livingston Jr. deserves credit, and you can feel why the debate matters. Whoever wrote it, they captured lightning in a bottle. They took a scattered set of traditions and gave them a single, repeatable scene. That's the power of a good story. It doesn't just describe culture, it rearranges it. The poem's Santa, still called St. Nicholas in the title, is not the stern saint of church calendars. He's playful, he's sneaky, he's almost comically small and lively. He arrives at night, when the world is quiet. He enters the home, the private refuge, and turns it into a stage for wonder. This is not street chaos. This is indoor magic. This is misruled domesticated and made adorable. You watch the child's face. Their eyes widen, not because the poem promises riches, but because it promises a visitor who appears when you're asleep, a visitor who comes through the impossible space of the chimney, a visitor with animals that fly. That's nonsense, obviously, and that is precisely why it works. Joke one arrives softly. You realize that in any other context, a stranger enters your home through the fireplace at midnight would be a horror story. But because it's Christmas, everyone's like, "Aw." Joke two. You picture a modern home with no chimney and Santa standing outside holding a ladder like, "So, what now?" Joke three. You suspect the true reason Santa is described as a right jolly old elf is so parents can justify the noise on the roof without panicking. As the poem continues, it does something else. It gives you a list. Names. Rhythm, a pattern you can memorize. That matters because what people can memorize, they can repeat. And what they can repeat, they can teach to children. This is how a cultural icon spreads, not only through print, but through mouths, through bedtime routines, through the warm ritual of being read to by someone you trust. You can feel Christmas pivot here. The holiday is still religious for many, still meal-centered, still regional, but now it has a shared imaginative core that can travel across denominations and neighborhoods. The poem doesn't demand a particular church practice. It doesn't require you to be Dutch. It doesn't require you to be wealthy. It simply offers an image of wonder that fits neatly into the home, where reformers want the holiday to live. A quirky tidbit slips in as you watch the adults smile at the child's reaction. The poem helps normalize the idea of Christmas Eve as a special moment, a night of anticipation rather than just the day itself. That shift matters. It creates a build-up, a suspense, a reason to make the night feel charged. The night before becomes its own sacred time, even if the sacredness is more emotional than theological. Historians still argue whether this poem is the single most important catalyst for the American Santa myth or whether it simply crystallizes changes already underway. You can feel that argument. 2. The culture was already moving toward a domestic, child-centered holiday. But the poem accelerates it. It gives everyone a template. It gives families a script. You step outside afterward, and the town feels different. Not because the streets are quieter yet, not entirely, but because now there's an alternative. A family can choose the hearth story instead of the tavern roar. A parent can use Santa as a moral nudge instead of relying on community pressure. A child can dream of reindeer instead of listening for drunken knocks at the door. You also begin to see how the poem subtly changes the emotional tone of giving. Gifts become part of a magical narrative rather than purely a practical exchange. The gift isn't just a scarf to keep you warm, it's evidence that you were visited, evidence that you were remembered, evidence that wonder exists, at least for one night. And once you have that, you can build traditions around it. Stockings make more sense. Nighttime rituals make more sense. Children behaving because Santa makes more sense. Even the idea of chimneys becomes culturally important. Like architecture, suddenly has mythological relevance. You glance at a chimney and think, yes, that's a portal now, which is hilarious, but also kind of beautiful. The poem spreads through newspapers, through reprints, through word of mouth, through families who learn it and keep it. And with each repetition, its details become more true, not in a factual sense, but in a cultural sense. People start expecting Santa to have reindeer. People start expecting a sleigh. People start expecting him to come at night. Expectations are the skeleton of tradition. Historians still argue about authorship. But the bigger fact is that the poem wins the cultural argument. It provides the image people adopt. It's cozy, it's mischievous but safe. It's supernatural but domestic. It's the holiday's wild energy pressed into a child-friendly shape. You feel, though, that one part is still missing. The poem gives a vibe, a scene, a motion, but it doesn't fully give you the face you recognize today. Not the full look, not the full iconography. That comes next, when ink and illustration start doing their own kind of magic, turning a character into a visual standard. So you linger in the afterglow of the recitation, the room warm with shared imagination. The child is finally drifting off, the poem still echoing in their mind like a lullaby. And you step forward into the decades where artists will begin to draw Santa into being, line by line, until he becomes a figure you'd recognize across a crowded street. The poem has planted the scene in everyone's head, but you're about to learn something slightly unsettling A scene isn't the same as a face. You can imagine a sleigh and reindeer, sure. But if you asked 10 people to describe Saint Nicholas right now, you'd still get a messy variety. Tall, short, severe, jolly, bishop-like, elf-like, wrapped in fur, wrapped in something else entirely. The myth is popular, but the visuals are still in flux. Then you step into the world of print, where pictures travel faster than spoken stories. And you realize, oh, this is where the character gets engineered. You're in a city now, where newspapers and magazines stack up like bricks of opinion. Ink stains fingers. Illustrations are studied, copied, clipped, pinned, shared. And there, in that buzzing paper ecosystem, Santa begins to take on a consistent shape. A mainstream historical fact anchors the shift. In the mid to late 19th century, illustrator Thomas Nast plays a major role in shaping the popular visual image of Santa Claus through drawings published in widely circulated magazines, helping standardize Santa's appearance and associating him with North Pole lore. Lists of children and other familiar elements. You can feel how powerful that is. Once you can see a character, you can recognize him. Once you can recognize him, you can sell him. Once you can sell him, you can spread him. Culture turns into a snowball, and it doesn't stop rolling. You stand over a table where someone is paging through an illustrated magazine. They point to a Santa figure and laugh. This Santa is not the polished, hyper-bright mascot of later decades, but he's getting close, rounder, warmer, more domestic, a figure who belongs in a home rather than a church. The details start to stick, the beard, the fur trim, the twinkle, the sense that he's friendly, not frightening. Historians still argue whether Nast is truly the creator of modern Santa's image, or whether he's the most influential popularizer among many artists and traditions. But you can see why people credit him. His drawings don't just depict a character. They build a whole world around him. A Santa workshop, a moral accounting system, a geography of magic. You notice how the visuals do something the poem couldn't. They communicate instantly. A child doesn't have to memorize verses to feel the idea. They can look at the picture and understand. This is the gift bringer. This is what he looks like. This is what he does. Visual standardization is cultural domination. But in a cozy way, joke 1, you realize this is basically the 19th century version of branding. Except nobody is calling it that. And the logo has a beard. Joke 2, you picture Santa's brand guidelines like beard must be fluffy, vibes must be jolly. And you laugh quietly. Joke 3, you suspect the real reason Santa gets rounder over time is because artists and audiences agree that a thin Santa would be emotionally disappointing, like a salad at a holiday party. Now, the context of Nast's work matters, too. You're in a nation that has just been shaken by the Civil War. People are hungry for symbols of unity, comfort, and moral reassurance. Santa becomes one of those symbols, not only because he's cheerful, but because he can be mobilized to say something about who we are and what we value. That's a lot of weight for a man who enters houses through chimneys. But culture loves multitasking. A quirky tidbit slips in as you watch someone point out a detail in an illustration. Nast's Santa is sometimes shown with elements that connect him to American national identity. And over time, the drawings help popularize the idea that Santa lives at the North Pole, keeps records of children's behavior, and operates in a quasi-industrial gift-making system. You can feel modern Santa's entire infrastructure forming here, like someone quietly building a factory of myth. Historians still argue whether the North Pole Association is primarily a creative flourish that caught on because it was charming, or whether it reflects broader 19th century fascinations with exploration and remote places that felt mysterious and pure. Either way, it works. The North Pole is distant enough to be magical, vague enough to be unquestioned, and cold enough to feel seasonally appropriate. It's basically the perfect imaginary address. You drift through a parlor where adults discuss the illustrations with interest. This is important. Santa isn't only for children yet. Adults are participating in the creation and consumption of the myth. They smile at the pictures. They joke about who is on the list. They enjoy the sentimentality. This is how a tradition becomes socially embedded. It's not just kids believing, it's adults enjoying the belief. At the same time, not everyone loves this. You can feel resistance. Some religious leaders worry that Santa distracts from the religious meaning of Christmas. Some moralists worry that the holiday is becoming too commercial, too indulgent, too silly. But the images keep circulating, and the character keeps gaining ground, because people are tired. Winter is long, and Santa offers a kind of emotional shortcut to warmth. You look at a drawing again and notice how Santa's body language matters. He's not solemn, he's not judging harshly. Even when he's linked to good and bad behavior, he's presented as playful. That's a shift from older, sterner moral frameworks. It matches the broader cultural move toward portraying childhood as innocent and deserving of gentleness. Santa becomes the friendly face of moral instruction, which is honestly more effective than a scolding sermon, especially if the sermon doesn't come with candy. The illustrations also teach families how to stage the holiday. Stockings become more visible as a tradition. Fireplace scenes become iconic. The act of children sleeping while magic happens becomes a ritual expectation. You start to see homes rearranging their holiday practices to match the images. This is one of the sneakiest ways culture changes. People copy what they see because it feels right. Historians still argue about causality here. Do images reflect what families are already doing? Or do families begin doing things because images suggest it? Standing here, you can feel the loop. Families adopt practices. Artists depict them. Depictions spread. More families adopt. A feedback cycle of coziness. By the end of the century, Santa's look is becoming recognizable across regions. Not perfectly fixed, but consistent enough that if you saw him in a crowded street, you'd know. That's him. That's the guy. The domestic myth has a face now, and once the holiday has a face, it can take on props, furniture, a centerpiece, something bigger than evergreen sprigs, something that turns the entire room into a stage. You can already smell it coming. Faintly, the resin scent of a whole tree dragged indoors, needles trembling as it's set upright, candles waiting, ornaments slowly appearing. The German tree is about to step into the American parlor and change the visual landscape of Christmas forever. You feel the shift before you fully see it. The house has already learned to decorate with sprigs and boughs, but now you step into a parlor and there's something bigger, more dramatic, more unmistakably performative, a whole evergreen standing upright like it has been promoted from scent accent to main character. It's not everywhere yet. Not in every town. Not in every class. But when you see it, you know you're watching a tradition arriving with momentum. A mainstream historical fact anchors the scene. The Christmas tree tradition, strongly associated with German-speaking communities, spreads in the United States during the 19th century, moving from immigrant households into broader middle-class practice over time, helped along by cultural exchange and popular images that make the decorated tree look fashionable and wholesome. You circle the tree slowly, taking it in. It's not covered in mass-produced plastic ornaments. It's more handmade, more improvised. Candles are clipped to branches. each flame tiny and risky, the tree essentially functioning as a holiday mood lamp that could also, if things go wrong, become a holiday emergency. The room smells intensely of pine, stronger than any single bough could manage. The tree's needles glitter with candlelight, and the shadows dance on the walls like soft ghosts. Joke 1. You realize the original Christmas tree tradition includes the exciting bonus game called Try Not to Burn Down Your House. Joke 2. You picture a 19th century parent saying, "Don't touch the tree," and a child hearing, "Touch the tree immediately." Joke 3. You imagine modern fire codes seeing this setup and simply fainting. People hang what they have. Strings of dried fruit, nuts wrapped in cloth, small handmade ornaments, paper chains, perhaps little treats tucked into branches like edible decorations. The tree becomes a place where scarcity transforms into creativity. It's not about perfection. It's about the fact that the room now has a focal point that signals, unmistakably, this is Christmas. This is not just winter. This is ritual. You notice how the tree changes the rhythm of the holiday. When there's a tree, there's a place to gather, a place to look, a place to place gifts, if gifts are being given. The tree becomes a visual anchor for domestic Christmas, reinforcing that shift away from the streets and toward the home. It's hard to have misrule in the street when you've got a glowing forest in your parlor demanding everyone's attention. Historians still argue whether the Christmas tree spreads primarily through immigration and community networks, or whether print culture and elite imitation accelerate it by turning the tree into a status symbol. Standing here, you can see the ladder of influence in action. An immigrant family does it because it's theirs. A neighbor sees it and finds it charming. A wealthy family adopts it because it looks refined and sentimental. A newspaper or magazine prints an image of it. Then the middle class adopts it because it looks like the ideal home. Suddenly the tree is everywhere, and people begin insisting it has always been part of Christmas, which is how traditions love to behave once they win. You drift into a wealthier household where the tree looks more elaborate. The branches hold imported ornaments, perhaps glass, perhaps more delicate, things that catch the candlelight and throw it back in sparkling fragments. There's ribbon, there's intentional symmetry. The tree is not just tradition here, it's display. It says, we have taste, we have time, we have enough money to decorate something that will literally die in a week and then be dragged out into the cold like yesterday's news. That last image makes you smile, because it's absurd, and absurdity is part of why it works. Humans love ritual precisely because it's unnecessary in the best way. A quirky tidbit slips in as you look closely at the ornaments. Early American Christmas trees often feature edible decorations, and children are sometimes allowed to harvest the treats from the branches as part of the celebration. Imagine the thrill of being told you can eat the tree. Not the needles, obviously, though someone, somewhere, tried. You can feel it in your bones. That child is eternal. The candles are lit carefully, supervised, and not left unattended, at least in sensible homes. The moment the tree lights up, the room changes. It feels like the holiday has turned on its own internal sunrise. People soften. Faces glow. Even the most restrained adults can't help but look a little moved. And this is where the tree's power really shows. Its visual sentimentality. It makes emotion easy. It gives people an instant sense of wonder without needing a poem, without needing a church calendar, without needing a crowd outside demanding cider. It's domestic spectacle that still feels wholesome. Historians still argue whether this kind of domestic spectacle is a genuine outgrowth of family affection or a cultural performance shaped by rising middle-class ideals about home life. but you can see how the two blend. Families do love each other. Families also want to look like they love each other in the socially approved way. The tree helps with both. You also sense the tree's connection to gift giving. Even when gifts are modest, placing them near the tree creates a focal ritual. The gift becomes part of a staged scene. It looks more magical. A scarf under a tree feels different than a scarf handed over at the table. Presentation matters, and the 19th century is learning that slowly but surely. Christmas is becoming a holiday of images as much as actions. You watch children being pulled toward the tree's glow like moths with better manners. They stare at the ornaments and candles as if the tree is alive. They ask questions. They point. They whisper. Adults smile and tell them to stand back. Because the candles, because the fire, because the tree is basically a beautiful hazard. Then you notice something else. The tree also brings music. People sing around it sometimes. Not always formal carols, but seasonal songs, hymns, tunes carried from old countries or learned from new print sources. The tree becomes a gathering point for sound as well as sight, and you can feel the next piece clicking into place. The music itself is shifting, spreading, becoming more codified. People are learning what to sing, where to sing it, and what it means socially to show up at someone's door with a song on your lips. Caroling, as you imagine it, isn't fully standardized yet. But the culture is preparing for it. You stand in the tree's candlelit aura, listening to murmurs and laughter, feeling the warmth of a room that has chosen to make winter beautiful. And you realize that this glowing evergreen is more than decoration. It's a declaration. Christmas belongs here now, in the home, in the family circle, in the soft domestic light. Then the candles are snuffed. The room returns to gentler darkness, and you follow the sound of singing somewhere outside, ready to step into the social choreography of holiday music. You catch the first note in the cold air like it's a snowflake landing on your cheek. It's faint at first, then clearer, a melody moving through the street, not blasting, not amplified, just carried by human breath and bravery. You turn a corner and see them. A small group gathered near a doorway, bundled tight, faces half hidden by scarves, eyes squinting from wind and candlelight. They are singing, but not necessarily what you would call carols in the modern playlist sense. Some songs are hymns, some are folk tunes with seasonal words. Some are older melodies with new verses patched on like mended clothing. This is music in transition, like everything else about Christmas in this century. A mainstream historical fact anchors the moment. In 19th century America, communal singing around Christmas includes a mix of religious hymns, traditional songs brought by immigrants, and gradually an expanding repertoire of Christmas-specific music. But the practice and style vary by region, denomination, and social class. Caroling as a widespread, standardized American custom is still forming, and it carries social meaning beyond the music. You watch the singers shift their weight from foot to keep warm. Their breath turns to fog in front of their faces, making each line look like it's leaving their mouths as visible proof. They finish a verse, and someone inside the house opens the door. Warmth spills out. There's a brief exchange. Smiles, gratitude, maybe an invitation to step inside, maybe just a quick handoff of food or drink, and you realize how different this is from the earlier door-to-door demanding you saw. The energy is softer. The power dynamic is changing. The singers aren't pounding on the door as a threat. They're offering something, and that offering makes it socially acceptable to receive something back. It's a kind of negotiated gentleness. Historians still argue whether caroling's rise is part of the broader reform movement to tame holiday disorder or a natural outgrowth of urban neighborhoods seeking new forms of community connection. standing here. You can feel how both could be true. Singing is safer than shouting. Music is a socially acceptable way to gather. It lets people be public without being violent. It turns the street into a shared space without turning it into a battleground. Joke 1. You imagine yourself joining this group and immediately realizing you don't know the words, so you just mouth watermelon like you do at concerts. Joke 2. You picture a 19th-century caroller encountering a modern apartment building with a security buzzer and having to sing into an intercom like, "Hello, it's us. Please unlock." Joke 3. You realize some things never change because there's always one person singing slightly too loud like they're auditioning for something. You follow the group as they move to the next house. They have a route, informal but understood. The houses they choose depend on social ties, who welcomes singers, who might offer a warm drink, who would be offended by noise. Caroling is not just music. It's social navigation. In some communities, especially those with strong church life, singing is organized through religious groups, youth groups, choirs, neighbors who gather after a service. The songs lean sacred, emphasizing the nativity. In other communities, the singing is more secular and playful, focusing on winter, goodwill, and the general vibe of being alive in a cold world. You hear a melody that feels familiar, but the words are slightly different from what you know. This is the era where songs mutate as they travel. A tune from England might arrive with one set of lyrics and slowly pick up American tweaks. A German song might be translated loosely. A hymn might be repurposed as seasonal music. The repertoire is expanding, but it's not fixed. A quirky tidbit slips in. Some 19th-century caroling includes not just singing, but also instrumental accompaniment, like fiddles or small drums. And in certain places, the line between caroling and older forms of seasonal visiting is still blurry. The performance can be merry and charming, but it can also be noisy, and sometimes it carries the expectation of a reward. Even the gentler tradition still has that ancient human logic. We bring you sound. You bring us something warm. You notice how the receivers of the music respond. Some people light up, grateful for the moment. Others look uneasy, unsure whether to treat this as welcome or intrusion. Social codes matter in a tightly controlled household. Unexpected visitors, even musical ones, can feel like a threat to order. In a more sociable household, the singers are embraced as part of the season's theater, and class matters too. In wealthier neighborhoods, caroling can become a polished performance, a kind of cultural display. In poorer neighborhoods, it can be rougher, more communal, more about warmth and shared endurance. Both are real. Both carry meaning. The same song can feel like refinement in one place and survival in another. A mainstream historical fact threads through this. As the 19th century progresses, the rise of print culture and music publishing helps spread specific Christmas songs more widely, contributing to a more standardized sense of what Christmas music is. You can imagine sheet music traveling, pianos in middle-class parlors, families learning songs to perform at gatherings. Music becomes part of the domestic ideal. A respectable home is one where people can sing together, where children can perform a little piece, where the holiday includes culture as well as food. Historians still argue whether this musical standardization is a top-down cultural project shaped by publishers and educators, or a bottom-up phenomenon driven by popular taste. But you can feel the demand. People want songs that fit the season. They want melodies that make winter feel meaningful. They want something to do together that doesn't involve getting drunk in the street and breaking a fence. You pause near a house where the singing has just ended. The door closes. The group laughs quietly, shaking snow from their sleeves. Someone sips from a shared cup. Someone complains about their toes going numb. Someone says, "One more house," which is always a lie. There are never only one more. That's the nature of seasonal roots. They stretch until someone collapses or the night wins. As you keep walking, you notice that the singing also serves as a kind of community census. You see who is home, who opens their door, who has enough to share, who is sick, who is alone. Caroling is social observation disguised as festive sound. It reinforces community bonds and community hierarchies at the same time. And you feel the next shift coming again, because the holiday is not only being domesticated through trees and songs, it's also being moralized through organized charity. The act of giving is becoming institutional, public, and sometimes performative. The season is learning how to turn generosity into a social spectacle that looks kind and also shapes behavior. You let the final notes of the carol fade into the cold, and you turn toward the places where charity is being organized, collected, and displayed, ready to see how Christmas starts to carry the weight of doing good. Sometimes for the right reasons, and sometimes because people like being seen doing it. You follow the thread of singing into a different kind of gathering, one that smells less like pine and more like paper. Ledgers, donation lists, meetings held in drafty rooms where someone is always coughing politely into their hand like they're trying not to interrupt virtue. This is where Christmas starts putting on a moral suit and combing its hair, because as the 19th century moves forward, generosity becomes more organized. Not just neighbor to neighbor, not just a plate passed quietly across a threshold, but structured, public, and often tied to institutions that want to shape society as much as help it. A mainstream historical fact anchors the scene. During the 19th century, especially in growing American cities, charitable organizations, churches, and reform movements increasingly use the Christmas season as a focal point for organized giving, including efforts directed toward the poor, orphans, and other vulnerable groups. Holiday charity events, collections, and seasonal drives become more common, and the idea of Christmas as a time for benevolence is steadily reinforced. You step into a church hall where baskets are being filled. Someone is sorting clothing. Someone is tallying coins. Someone is writing names in a careful hand. The mood is earnest. People speak softly, as if loudness would cheapen the goodness. A woman holds up a child's coat and sighs, not dramatically, but with that quiet fatigue that says she has seen too much winter. You notice how charity changes the atmosphere of Christmas. It makes the holiday feel bigger than the household. It extends it outward, but it also introduces surveillance and judgment. Who deserves help? Who is worthy? Who is idle? Who is fallen? The 19th century loves moral categories the way modern people love sorting playlists. Everyone wants neat boxes, even when life refuses to fit. Historians still argue whether the rise of Christmas charity is primarily a genuine expansion of compassion driven by religious and social ideals or a mechanism of social control used by middle-class reformers to manage poverty and enforce norms. Standing here, you can feel the tension in the very act of giving. A basket of food can be kindness. It can also be a message. Behave. Conform. Be grateful. Become respectable. Joke 1. You realize holiday spirit sometimes comes with paperwork, which is the least magical sentence in human history. Joke 2. You picture a Victorian reformer discovering modern online donation platforms and immediately trying to add a moral essay to the checkout page. Joke 3. You imagine Santa's nice list as the ultimate charity eligibility screening tool and shudder gently. You move through the city and see posters announcing holiday charity events, benefit concerts, relief collections. There's a sense that Christmas is a season for public goodness, and public goodness is good publicity. even when intentions are sincere. Being seen doing charity matters. It builds reputation. It signals respectability. It says, "We are the kind of people who care." You step into an orphan asylum, and the air changes. It's warmer than outside, but it has that institutional smell: boiled cloth, soap, too many bodies and too little space. The children move in a cluster, their eyes tracking visitors with a mixture of hope and caution. Some are excited because visitors might bring treats. Some are guarded because visitors come and go, and the children are the ones who remain. A quirky tidbit slips in, and it's oddly specific. Holiday celebrations in orphanages and charitable institutions sometimes include staged Christmas dinners or gift distributions that visitors attend like a moral performance, with children expected to appear grateful, orderly, and improved. The children become part of the season's theater. Their happiness is both real and curated, because it serves a purpose beyond their own comfort. You watch a line of children receive small gifts: oranges, candies, simple toys, maybe warm clothing. Their faces brighten. Gratitude is genuine, but you also see the adults watching, assessing. The institution wants donors to feel their money is effective. It wants proof. Proof often looks like disciplined children and visible cheer. Historians still argue whether these institutional celebrations offer meaningful comfort and stability, or whether they primarily reinforce power imbalances and sentimentalize poverty for the benefit of the giver. Again, you can feel both truths at once. A child biting into an orange in winter is genuinely happy. That moment matters, but the structure around it can still be exploitative, even if unintentionally. Outside, you walk past a wealthy home where charity takes another form: the giving of leftovers. A basket of food sent to a poor family, a bundle of old clothes. Sometimes it's generous. Sometimes it's what the wealthy no longer need. The line between generosity and disposal gets blurry. But even so, for the receiver, it can mean warmth, survival, relief. The moral complexity doesn't erase the physical value. A mainstream historical fact threads through this. The 19th century's rapid urbanization increases visible poverty in cities, and Christmas charity becomes a culturally reinforced response, shaped by religious revivalism, social reform, and emerging notions of respectable domestic life. The holiday is being recruited as a tool to address, or at least soothe, the discomfort of inequality. You sense that discomfort everywhere, in the way wealthy families decorate lavishly while poor families scramble for coal, in the way children in institutions are given treats while their futures remain uncertain, in the way donors smile warmly and then go home to a parlor with a tree. As you stand near the orphanage door, you feel the cold air rush in again, and it makes you think about who experiences Christmas as comfort and who experiences it as a reminder of lack. The holiday is becoming sentimental, but sentiment can be sharp. A story about warmth can make cold feel colder by contrast. You also begin to see how charity feeds the Santa myth. Santa is an easy symbol for giving. He makes generosity feel magical rather than political. He turns complex social problems into a narrative of personal goodness. That doesn't mean charity is bad. It means the holiday is learning to tell stories that smooth discomfort. Historians still argue whether Santa's popularity grows, partly because he helps society avoid confronting deeper inequalities, offering a feel-good framework that emphasizes individual giving over structural change. You can feel that argument in the quiet space between a donor's smile and a child's need. The evening ends with a Christmas dinner event in a public hall. Volunteers ladle soup. People line up. Some are ashamed. Some are grateful. Some are simply exhausted. A few children laugh, because children can laugh anywhere if you give them a moment. The room is loud in a different way than the tavern. Less swagger, more hunger. Less chaos, more need. You step outside afterward and the city feels heavy. The holiday glow is real, but it's unevenly distributed. Some windows glitter, others stay dark. And now, as you walk onward, the story is about to confront a reality that reshapes everything you've seen. Christmas in America is not experienced equally. Not by class, not by region, and not by race. The next layer isn't cozy, it's complicated. Because for enslaved people and free black communities, the season carries meanings that don't fit neatly into pine scent and carols. It can include brief respite, forced performance, hard labor, family separation, and a constant negotiation with power. You let the last echo of the charity hall fade behind you, and you head toward that harder truth. Still in second person, still in winter, still moving forward. You walk into a different Christmas entirely. And the temperature isn't what changes first. It's the air, the way people measure their words, the way joy, when it appears, has to squeeze through narrow spaces. In the South, in enslaving states, the holiday season arrives like it does everywhere, with cold nights and shortened days. But it lands on two completely different worlds stacked on the same land. You stand near a plantation house where the windows glow bright, and then you turn your head and see the quarters farther off. Darker, tighter, more crowded. The same moon hangs over both. The same wind moves across both. But the meaning of Christmas doesn't travel evenly through that wind. A mainstream historical fact settles in with weight. In the antebellum United States, enslaved people's lives are controlled by slaveholders, and while some enslavers allow limited time off or rations during Christmas, these allowances are inconsistent and always constrained by power. For some enslaved people, the season can include brief respite, gatherings, and religious observance. For others, it's a period of intensified surveillance, forced performance, or painful reminders of separation and lack. Even celebration, when permitted, happens inside a cage of coercion. You hear laughter in one place and realize how complicated laughter can be. Because laughter can be relief, it can be defiance. It can be the body grabbing a moment of oxygen, but it can also be demanded, staged, or punished, depending on who is watching. You drift toward a gathering where enslaved people are allowed, tonight, to meet. Someone has managed to bring food. Someone has music, maybe a fiddle, maybe just hands clapping a rhythm into the dark. The warmth here is human, not architectural. People press close, sharing stories, sharing news, sharing the small comfort of being together in a world designed to keep them apart. And you notice religion everywhere, but not always in the way it appears in white churches. You hear spiritual singing, the cadence carrying both faith and coded longing. The nativity story, the idea of a child born into hardship, can feel piercingly relevant. You don't need anyone to explain why. The story of deliverance has always been louder in places where captivity is real. Historians still argue whether Christmas time off for enslaved people is primarily a cynical safety valve used by enslavers to reduce resistance and manage labor, or whether it also becomes a meaningful cultural space that enslaved communities shape for themselves despite oppressive conditions. Standing here, you can feel how both can be true at once. A master might grant days off to look benevolent or to keep people compliant. But the enslaved still use those days in their own way, turning stolen time into community, memory, and survival. A quirky tidbit slips in, the kind that makes your stomach tighten. In some places, Enslaved people are expected to perform for white audiences during the holidays, with music and dancing treated as entertainment that reinforces stereotypes and power. There are also accounts of Christmas season practices where enslaved people are made to participate in rituals that mock them or position them as objects of amusement. It's not the holiday spirit. It's domination wearing tinsel. Joke 1, carefully and softly. Because this is not a scene that invites much levity. You realize the phrase forced fun has never been more literal. And suddenly every awkward modern office party feels like a gentle baby cousin by comparison. Joke 2 comes as a small release valve. You picture a cheerful holiday host chirping, "Just smile," and history itself giving them a long, icy stare. Joke 3 is the quietest. You wish the season came with a switch that simply turned off cruelty. And you're reminded that people have always been the ones holding the switch. You move north in your imagination into free black communities in northern cities and towns. Here, Christmas can look different again. Free black churches and mutual aid societies create their own rhythms of worship and community support. But freedom does not mean safety. Racism and discrimination shape daily life. Jobs are limited. Neighborhoods can be hostile. The holiday can still carry pressure and threat. Yet you also see determination. People gathering in homes, sharing food when they can, building institutions that hold the community together. A mainstream historical fact threads through the scene. Throughout the 19th century, black churches and community organizations play central roles in social life, education, and mutual support. And holiday gatherings can be an extension of that, especially as communities navigate legal inequality and social violence. Christmas becomes, for many, not only a religious observance, but a moment to reinforce collective strength. You listen to conversations that circle back to family, because family is everything in a world that tries to fracture it. For enslaved people, Christmas can be one of the rare times when travel between plantations is sometimes permitted, allowing visits to spouses or children on other properties. Sometimes, not always. And that sometimes is a knife, because the permission can be revoked. The roads can be too dangerous. A person can be sold at any time, regardless of the season, and Christmas cheer can collapse into grief with a single announcement. Historians still argue whether holiday travel permissions, when granted, increase enslaved people's sense of community and resilience, or whether they deepen the cruelty by highlighting how control is absolute and kindness is conditional. Again, both shadows fall across the same snow. A visit can be a miracle. The fact that it requires permission is the cruelty. You watch the season's food, too. And the inequality is stark. In the big house, there's abundance, polished silver, a table that performs wealth. In the quarters, there may be extra rations if the enslaver chooses, or the community might pool what they can. Sometimes the best food comes from ingenuity, what can be grown, hunted, traded, saved. The feast, when it happens, is not a display. It's an achievement. You also sense the danger that rides along with any gathering. More people together means more chance to talk, more chance to plan, more chance to share news of escape routes, of abolitionist activity, of shifting politics. That makes enslavers nervous. So even holiday gatherings can be watched closely. The season is not only about rest. It's about surveillance and the fear of what might happen when people have a moment to breathe. And in northern cities, you can feel another kind of tension. Black communities building celebration in spaces where they are still excluded from many public rituals or treated as unwelcome participants. Christmas becomes something you host yourself, in your own rooms, with your own music, with your own sense of what the season means. You pause on a street where white families sing carols and pass out treats, and then you turn into a lane where a black family does the same thing in quieter form, behind curtains, choosing safety, the same holiday, different calculations. A mainstream historical fact settles into the cold. The 19th century is a period of intensifying national conflict over slavery, culminating in the Civil War, and that conflict shapes everyday life, including holidays, even when people try to keep Christmas apolitical. The country itself refuses. The holiday becomes a mirror for the nation's contradictions. Talk of peace alongside systems of violence, talk of goodwill alongside legal and social exclusion. You stand still for a moment, listening to two kinds of music in the distance, and you feel how Christmas is becoming louder culturally. At the same time, the nation is tearing itself open. The sentimental, domestic Christmas is growing. Santa is becoming clearer. Trees and songs and charity are spreading. But beneath that, there is a reality that sentiment cannot erase. And you can sense what comes next. Because the timeline is moving toward war, toward letters, packages, longing and propaganda, toward a Christmas reshaped by soldiers and separation. The Civil War is going to pull the holiday into a new emotional register, making it both more tender and more politically useful. You take one more breath of this complicated winter air, and you keep walking forward, knowing the next Christmas you meet will carry uniforms, campfires, and the ache of distance, and it will change the holiday's voice for everyone. You step into a winter that smells like wood smoke and damp canvas, and the first thing you notice is how far from home everyone is. The holiday season arrives anyway, because the calendar doesn't care about war, but the war changes the meaning of every familiar detail. Christmas comes to camps and hospitals, to train stations and muddy fields, to letters folded small enough to fit in a pocket near the heart. You're walking through an army camp now, and the cold feels sharper because there's so little comfort to buffer it. The ground is churned into a kind of frozen mess. Men stomp their boots to keep feeling in their toes. Someone tries to joke about the weather like humor can build a shelter. The night sky is clear in that cruel way winter skies can be, full of stars that look indifferent and perfect. A mainstream historical fact anchors the scene. During the American Civil War, soldiers on both sides marked Christmas in varied ways, often with improvised celebrations, special rations when available, religious services, and exchanges of letters and packages, and the holiday becomes a potent symbol of home, longing, and national identity. It's not universally celebrated in the same way, but it becomes emotionally louder. You hear the word home said like a prayer, not always in a soft voice, sometimes in a rough one, like they're trying to toughen it up so it won't break them. Someone holds a letter and reads it twice, 3 times, until the creases start to soften. Someone else stares into a small fire and pretends they're looking at flames, not imagining a parlor back in Ohio or Virginia or Massachusetts. In the camp, someone has managed to bring a tiny tree, not a grand parlor evergreen, just a scraggly little thing stuck into the ground or propped against a tent pole. It's decorated with whatever can be found, bits of cloth, a ribbon torn from somewhere, maybe a few hardtack crumbs pressed into service as ornaments, which is both sad and kind of funny in a bleak way. Joke 1. You realize this is the original minimalist Christmas aesthetic, except nobody chose it, and the vibe is mostly hunger. Joke 2. You picture a soldier trying to hang a candle on a tree and getting yelled at by everyone because even in war, people do not want to die in a festive fire. Joke 3. You imagine a modern influencer trying to photograph this rustic holiday look and the soldiers collectively refusing to pose. There are songs, not always carols, sometimes patriotic tunes, sometimes hymns, sometimes whatever melody people can remember. Singing in a camp is different than singing in a parlor. It's louder, rougher, meant to travel over wind and distance. The sound feels like a rope thrown across the dark, something to hold on to. Historians still argue whether the Civil War accelerates the domestication of Christmas by intensifying nostalgia for home life, or whether it primarily politicizes the holiday by turning Christmas symbols into tools of propaganda and morale. Standing here, you can see both forces working at once. A soldier clings to the idea of a warm home because it's survival. At the same time, leaders and newspapers lean into Christmas imagery because it stirs hearts and steadies resolve. You walk past a group of men exchanging small gifts: a carved pipe, a bit of tobacco, a pair of socks knitted by someone far away. Practical, but emotionally explosive because the gift carries the hands of home. You can almost feel the moment a soldier opens a package and catches the scent of his own house on the fabric. A faint trace of soap or smoke or whatever his family's air smells like. It hits him like a wave. He has to look away for a second, and you understand why. A mainstream historical fact threads through this. During the Civil War, families at home often send care packages of food, clothing, and small comforts to soldiers. And aid organizations also contribute supplies, reinforcing Christmas as a time when giving is linked to patriotism and support for troops. The holiday becomes a logistical operation as much as an emotional one. You also see the darker side. In hospitals, Christmas arrives in the form of visitors bringing oranges, broth, clean bandages, small tokens of comfort to wounded men. The smell here is different. Antiseptic attempts, human suffering, boiled cloth. You don't linger on gore, but you feel the exhaustion in the room, the way Christmas cheer has to walk quietly, like it's afraid to disturb the pain. A nurse holds a soldier's hand while someone reads a scripture passage. A chaplain speaks softly. The holiday becomes less about celebration and more about kindness pressed into the shape of survival. Historians still argue whether the war's Christmas narratives, so often sentimental and home-focused, help create the later national myth of Christmas as primarily a family holiday. You can feel how the emotional language of wartime letters and newspaper stories builds that myth. People write about mothers, wives, children, hearths, and longing. They paint the home as sacred. The more fragile it feels, the more sacred it becomes. And then you see something that snaps the story back to Santa. In wartime print culture, artists begin to use Santa as a symbol. He appears in illustrations meant to boost morale, to humanize the cause, to suggest that even in war, the nation can still claim goodness. This is where the holiday figure becomes politically useful. A quirky tidbit slips in as you recall the emerging visual culture. Santa is sometimes depicted in wartime imagery, interacting with soldiers, blending the domestic myth with national struggle, reinforcing the idea that Christmas belongs to the nation's emotional life, even in conflict. It's a strange transformation. When you think about it, a gift bringer becomes a messenger of national purpose. You watch soldiers receive a special meal if supplies allow, maybe extra meat, maybe coffee, maybe a ration of something sweet. The men eat slowly, savoring. Food tastes different when it's rare. Someone jokes that this is the best Christmas dinner they've ever had, and the laugh that follows is brittle but real. On the home front, you can feel the holidays ache too. Families decorate trees, light candles, sing songs. But there's a missing chair at the table. A mother stares at the door as if a miracle might walk through it. Children are told stories about St. Nicholas and reindeer, and the stories carry a new purpose: distraction, comfort, hope. Santa becomes not just fun, but medicine. Historians still argue whether the Civil War's emotional intensification of Christmas makes the holiday more popular nationwide or simply gives it new meanings in places where it was already growing. Either way, you can feel the result. Christmas is becoming harder to ignore. It's becoming a shared emotional language. As the war grinds on, Christmas becomes a marker of time. Another year, another winter, another stretch of waiting. Letters are dated. Packages are labeled. People write Merry Christmas with a kind of desperation, like they're trying to conjure the future by naming it. You stand in the camp again as night deepens. Fires glow like scattered orange eyes. Somewhere a lone voice sings a hymn, slower now, almost sleepy, and you feel that familiar pull toward home even if you've never been in this person's home. That's the power of the season taking shape. It's becoming universal enough to be shared, specific enough to be felt. And as you step forward, you sense the next transformation waiting in the post-war years, the rise of shopping windows, department stores, and the idea that Christmas is not only something you feel, but something you buy. The holiday is about to become an economic engine, and the streets that once hosted misrule will soon host crowds of shoppers instead. The war recedes, but it leaves behind a nation that feels older, hungrier, and oddly more sentimental. You step into a post-war city where the streets are louder again, but it's a different kind of loud, less drunken revelry, more commerce, less who's banging on my door, more who's crowding the sidewalk. The cold is the same, but the purpose of being out in it has shifted. You walk past a storefront window and stop without meaning to, because the glass is doing something new. It's not just showing goods. It's telling a story. There are toys displayed like tiny promises, dolls with painted faces, tin soldiers, wooden trains, little books with bright covers. The window is lit to lure your eyes in from the dark street, and you realize that Christmas is becoming an organized public spectacle again. But this time, the spectacle is designed to make you spend money rather than throw snowballs at your neighbor's shutters. A mainstream historical fact anchors the moment. In the latter half of the 19th century, the growth of urban department stores and expanded retail culture helps reshape Christmas into a major commercial season. With store displays, advertising, and expanded availability of manufactured goods encouraging gift-giving and turning the holiday into an economic event. Christmas becomes the season in a way that is increasingly linked to shopping. You drift closer to the window and see your own reflection layered over the merchandise, like you are being invited to join the scene. People around you are doing the same. Families pause. Children press their hands to the glass. Adults pretend they're not impressed and then linger anyway. The window becomes a public hearth. Instead of gathering around firelight, the city gathers around lit displays. Historians still argue whether commercialization corrupts Christmas or simply expands it, making gift-giving more accessible and standardizing rituals across regions. But you can feel how quickly the holiday's center of gravity is shifting. The domestic ideal still matters, but now the home is being supplied by the marketplace. The tree needs ornaments. The stockings need fillers. The children now have a growing list of things that exist and can be desired. Joke 1. You realize that window shopping is the 19th century invention of doom scrolling, except the algorithm is just your own envy. Joke 2. You picture a Victorian shopper seeing a limited time offer sign and feeling the same panic you feel when a modern checkout timer starts counting down. Joke 3. You imagine Santa watching all this and whispering, "This is getting out of hand," while quietly signing a licensing deal anyway. Inside the store, it's warm in a way that feels engineered. Not hearth warmth, but crowded warmth. The air smells like wool coats drying, perfume, paper, and the metallic hint of coins changing hands. Clerks move quickly. Shoppers speak in urgent tones. There's a sense that the season is a deadline. Buy now. Prepare now. Don't be the person who shows up empty-handed. You notice how the store doesn't just sell objects. It sells an idea of what Christmas should look like. A respectable family has a tree. A respectable family gives gifts. A respectable family decorates. A respectable mother makes the home beautiful. A respectable father provides the money. These roles are being reinforced through merchandise and marketing, through subtle pressure that feels like tradition, but is often newly manufactured. A quirky tidbit slips in. Early retail Christmas promotions sometimes include special in-store attractions or spectacles meant to draw families in, creating a holiday outing experience rather than just a transaction. The store becomes entertainment. It becomes an event. You can see why children would beg to go, not just for toys, but for the wonder of the place itself. The store is the new public festival, controlled and profitable. Historians still argue whether this shift to retail-centered Christmas is driven more by merchants deliberately shaping consumer behavior or by consumers actively seeking new ways to express affection and identity through purchases. You can feel the feedback loop again. Merchants offer goods and narratives. Families adopt them. Demand grows. Merchants expand offerings. The season inflates. You step back outside into the cold and watch the street. It's crowded now with shoppers rather than revelers. The crowd still has energy. But it's focused. People clutch parcels. They hurry. They bargain. They complain about prices. They joke about the stress. The street has become a river of commerce, and the holiday is the current pulling everyone along. You notice how this changes gift-giving norms. Practical gifts still exist, but novelty becomes more available. Toys become more common. Decorative items become more attainable. The idea of buying something just because it's festive starts to make sense, which is honestly a dangerous concept for any society, but also a very human one. People want beauty. They want surprise. They want little luxuries that make winter feel less bleak. A mainstream historical fact threads through this. Industrialization and improved manufacturing and distribution in the 19th century increased the availability of consumer goods, including toys and printed materials, helping make Christmas gift-giving more widespread and shifting expectations toward purchased presents rather than purely handmade or practical items. This doesn't happen overnight, but you can feel it speeding up. You also notice how the poor experience this commercialization differently. For those with money, the season feels like choice. For those without, it can feel like pressure and exclusion. Store windows become reminders of what you can't afford. Even charity, which you saw earlier, now competes with the glitter of retail. A child might receive a donated coat and still feel envy for the toy in the window. That doesn't make the child bad. It makes the system loud. Historians still argue whether the commercialization of Christmas intensifies class divisions by creating new standards of proper celebration, or whether it eventually broadens participation by making small gifts more common at many income levels. Standing here, you can see the beginning of both. The standards rise. The goods spread. The tension increases. As you walk, you see printed advertisements in newspapers, seasonal language, holiday sales, suggestions for gifts. The press that helped spread the Santa myth now helps spread the shopping myth. And that's not even cynical. It's just how media works. It amplifies what people are already leaning toward. And in the midst of it all, you sense another innovation riding alongside commerce. The postal system, the ability to send a card, a letter, a package. The idea that Christmas can be maintained across distance not only through longing, but through physical tokens delivered by networks. The season is about to become more connected, more synchronized, and more standardized through the simple power of mail. You pause at a corner where a street vendor is selling printed holiday items, and you realize that one of the most revolutionary Christmas technologies isn't a toy or a tree or even Santa. It's paper. Printed greetings. Cards that let you say, "I remember you," without having to travel through snow. So you turn toward the post office, toward the quiet machinery of connection, ready to watch Christmas become something that can travel in an envelope. You step into the post office, and it feels like stepping into a human beehive that runs on ink, string, and impatience. The air is warm from bodies packed close together, and it smells like paper, damp coats, and that faint metallic tang of coins and keys. A clerk calls out a name. Someone leans forward, hopeful. Someone else sighs loudly like they're auditioning for the role of most put-upon holiday customer. This is one of the quiet revolutions of 19th century Christmas. The season starts to travel, not only through stories and songs, but through envelopes and parcels. Distance doesn't disappear, but it becomes negotiable. A mainstream historical fact anchors the moment. Throughout the 19th century, expanding postal networks and increasing literacy and print production helped make letter writing and the exchange of seasonal greetings more common, contributing to a more connected and standardized sense of holiday communication across the United States. The ability to send messages and small gifts through the mail becomes part of how people do Christmas, especially as families spread out across growing cities and westward migration. You watch someone carefully address an envelope, the handwriting deliberate. They blot the ink. They fold the paper with a kind of tenderness, like the fold itself is an embrace. A mother sends a letter to a son far away. A husband sends a note to a wife visiting family. A sister sends a small package tied with string, so tight it looks like it could survive a shipwreck. These are emotional objects. The post office is basically a building where feelings are processed. Outside, you see postal workers moving fast, sacks of mail slung over shoulders. There's urgency because the season creates a deadline. If you want the letter to arrive for Christmas, you have to send it now. The holiday becomes a calendar pressure that shapes public behavior. People line up, grumble, and still keep coming. Because the need to reach someone across distance is stronger than annoyance. Joke 1. You realize the 19th century version of tracking your package is staring at the road like you can summon the mail coach with your mind. Joke 2. You picture someone dramatically declaring, "The mail is late," and an older postal worker replying, "Yes, it's winter," with the calm of someone who has seen too much snow. Joke 3. You imagine a Victorian person discovering modern read receipts and immediately deciding to live in a cave. Now, cards. You start seeing them more often. Not necessarily the glossy, standardized Christmas cards you know, but printed seasonal greetings, decorative notes, sometimes with winter scenes, religious imagery, or sentimental messages. The very existence of a holiday card changes things. It gives people a script, a socially acceptable way to reach out, a reason to write to someone you haven't spoken to in months without it being awkward. A quirky tidbit slips in. Early seasonal greeting cards and a printed holiday ephemera often blend imagery of winter landscapes, moral sentiments, and religious themes, and sometimes include humor or oddly bleak winter scenes by modern standards. People are still figuring out the tone. Some cards feel warm and festive. Others feel like, "May you survive the frosts," which is, honestly, accurate. The holiday aesthetic is still learning how to be cheerful consistently. Historians still argue whether the rise of holiday cards primarily reflects growing social networks and middle-class etiquette, or whether it helps create those networks by encouraging routine connection. You can feel the chicken and egg loop again. More people move to cities. Families spread out. Social circles expand. Cards become useful. Cards also encourage more frequent contact, reinforcing the idea that Christmas is a time for reaching out. You watch a woman choose paper carefully, debating what's appropriate. This is another layer. The holiday becomes tied to social codes. Who do you send cards to? How many? What do you write? What's too formal? What's too intimate? The season is becoming a kind of social audit. If you don't send something, will you be forgotten? Will you seem rude? The holiday's warmth comes with a little anxiety tucked underneath like a hidden needle in a hem. Packages are another level. People send practical items, knitted socks, homemade preserves, dried fruit, a bit of candy. People also send small purchased gifts now that commerce is expanding. The mail becomes an extension of the hearth. A box arriving at your door is a miniature visit. It says, "I can't be there, but something of me can." A mainstream historical fact threads through this. By the late 19th century, the combination of improved transportation networks and postal services makes it increasingly feasible for Americans to exchange goods and greetings over long distances during the holiday season, reinforcing Christmas as a nationwide shared event rather than a purely local custom. The holiday grows in synchrony. More people experience it at the same time, in similar ways. You step outside and watch a mail coach roll through slush, wheels creaking. People glance up with a kind of instinctive hope, like the vehicle might be carrying their happiness inside. Someone waves. Someone jogs toward it. Someone stands still, pretending not to care, which is the oldest and least convincing performance in history. Historians still argue whether this growing communication network makes Christmas more emotionally intense by heightening expectations and longing, or whether it provides comfort by making separation less absolute. Again, both. A letter can soothe. It can also make you ache harder because it reminds you how far away someone is. A card can make you smile. It can also make you realize who didn't send one. You also notice how the content of letters and cards contributes to the holiday's standardization. People repeat phrases. Merry Christmas, Happy Christmas, Season's greetings. These phrases become common currency, a shared language. The holiday becomes easier to participate in because the words are provided. The rhythm of communication becomes ritual. As evening falls, you return to a home where a letter has just arrived. The household gathers around it as if it's a storybook. Someone reads aloud. Everyone listens. The writer's voice fills the room even though the writer is miles away. The room feels briefly larger, connected to another place. For a moment, distance shrinks, and you realize that this is part of what builds the modern Christmas feeling, a sense of synchronized connection. The idea that you are not only celebrating in your own home, but participating in a broad social event that stretches beyond your street and town. The mail stitches the country together in seasonal thread. Now you feel the next shift approaching again? Because once communication becomes routine, the home itself becomes even more central as the holiday stage. The season starts to define what a proper family Christmas looks like. A mother orchestrating comfort, a father providing, children at the heart of the scene, and the domestic interior presented as a moral ideal. You fold the letter in your mind, tuck it close, and walk toward the warm glow of parlors and the growing cultural script of the family Christmas, where the holiday retreats deeper into the home and settles there like a cat claiming the best chair. You step into a parlor that feels almost staged, even if no one would say that out loud. The room is warm, tidy, and arranged with intention. The tree stands in a place where it can be seen from the best chair. The candles are placed where they flatter faces. The table has a cloth that might not come out on ordinary days. Everything whispers the same message. This home is doing Christmas correctly, and you realize you're watching the holiday settle into a new identity, one that will become so familiar to you later that it will feel like it has always been this way. But here, in the late 19th century, you can still see the seams. A mainstream historical fact anchors the shift as the 19th century progresses, especially among the growing American middle class. Christmas becomes increasingly framed as a domestic, family-centered holiday, with ideals of home life, childhood innocence, and maternal caretaking playing prominent roles in how the season is celebrated and represented in literature, art, and social commentary. The home is no longer just where Christmas happens. The home is what Christmas is about. You watch the household's choreography, and it's clear who is expected to orchestrate the feeling. The mother, or the primary female caretaker, is moving constantly. She adjusts a ribbon. She checks the pot. She smooths a child's hair. She makes sure guests are comfortable. She's the quiet engine of the holiday's warmth. Everyone praises the lovely Christmas, as if it appeared naturally, as if it grew on the tree like fruit, rather than being built through labor. Joke 1. You realize the true Christmas magic is someone doing 10 tasks at once while pretending they are relaxed. Joke 2. You picture the phrase, "It's fine," being invented right here, in a parlor, by a woman who has been cooking since dawn. Joke 3. You imagine telling a 19th century mother about modern elf on the shelf and watching her calmly set it on fire with a look that says, "Absolutely not." This domestic ideal doesn't just happen in private. It's reinforced in public through stories and images. The sentimental Christmas tale becomes popular, the family gathered, the moral lesson learned, the poor helped, the child warmed by love and firelight. These narratives teach people what to want. They also teach people what to feel ashamed of if they can't achieve it. Historians still argue whether the family Christmas is a genuine cultural expression of increased affection and focus on children, or whether it's a prescriptive ideal pushed by middle-class commentators and reformers who want to regulate behavior and stabilize society. You can feel the prescription in the room. Even as people genuinely love one another, they are also performing a standard. And fathers have a role in this performance too. The father is expected to provide materially, to be the respectable anchor, to bring the gifts, or at least to have funded them. He may also be the one who plays Santa behind the scenes, though no one calls it that openly in every household. You catch glimpses of it, a conspiratorial look, a quiet trip to another room, the sound of paper rustling, a package appearing mysteriously. The domestic myth is running. Children sit at the center now, not just physically but emotionally. Adults watch them with a kind of reverence. The child's delight becomes the proof that Christmas is working. The child's innocence becomes the reason the holiday must be gentle, moral, and warm. This is a major transformation from the earlier centuries' adult-oriented street revelry. Childhood has become the holiday's heart. A quirky tidbit slips in as you watch a child rehearse a little recitation or song. In some households, children perform for guests during Christmas gatherings, reciting poems, singing hymns, or showing off lessons learned, turning the holiday into a stage for demonstrating both affection and proper upbringing. It's adorable and slightly stressful. Like the holiday is also a report card. You see the way the room divides into zones. The adults talk in one corner about news and money and politics, but in softer tones than usual because it's Christmas and you're supposed to be kind. The children cluster near the tree, eyeing gifts or treats. The kitchen remains the hidden battlefield where labor continues. The domestic Christmas is peaceful for some because others are working to make it so. You also notice how this family Christmas ideal starts to influence architecture and household routines. Fireplaces matter. Parlors matter. Space for a tree matters. Even if a home is small, people try to carve out a corner that can become Christmas. The holiday becomes interior design. Historians still argue whether the domestic ideal of Christmas helps strengthen family bonds, or whether it intensifies pressures on women and reinforces narrow social roles. Standing here, you can feel both. The holiday does create togetherness. It also concentrates responsibility. If Christmas feels wrong, blame lands on the household manager, usually the mother, and that's not fair. But it's real. Outside, you can still hear the world. There's still poverty. There's still labor. There are still people who can't afford candles or trees. But the family Christmas story often smooths those realities, turning hardship into a sentimental backdrop for moral lessons rather than a structural problem. The holiday becomes a comfort narrative. A mainstream historical fact threads through this. 19th-century literature and popular media increasingly portray Christmas as a time of moral renewal, family unity, and sentimental reflection, shaping public expectations and helping standardize how Americans imagine proper celebration. The holiday becomes a national emotional script. You stand in the parlor and watch a child drift closer to sleep, cheek leaning against a parent's shoulder, candlelight flickering gently. The room is soft. The scene is genuinely beautiful. You can feel why people fall in love with this version of Christmas. It promises safety. It promises warmth. It promises that the home can hold the world's chaos at bay, at least for one night. And you can also feel why some people resist. Because once the holiday has a proper script, anyone who doesn't match it can be judged. Anyone who prefers a different tradition can be pressured. Anyone who is poor can be shamed. Anyone who is lonely can feel the holiday's softness as an ache, which brings you to the next turning point. Santa is winning. Yes, but not quietly. There are arguments about him, about what he replaces, about whether he distracts from religion, about whether commerce is swallowing the holiday, about whether children are being spoiled. The red-suited intruder is about to become both beloved and controversial. You let the parlor scene linger like warmth on your skin, and you step forward toward the debates and the triumph, toward the moment when Santa becomes the dominant symbol and the country starts arguing about what that means. The next thing you notice is that Santa doesn't just glide into the culture like a gentle snowfall. He stomps in with muddy boots, and then everyone argues about whether he should take his shoes off. The domestic Christmas is now well underway. Trees are more common. Gifts are more expected. Songs are more recognizable. Charity has its seasonal spotlight. And Santa, with his growing visual consistency and story power, is becoming the face people reach for when they need a symbol. But not everyone smiles about it. You walk through a town where a church bulletin announces a Christmas service focused on the Nativity. And right next to it, a shop window displays a Santa figure looking very pleased with himself. The contrast is almost comedic. It's as if two holidays are sharing the same date and politely pretending they're not in competition. A mainstream historical fact anchors the tension. In the late 19th century, Santa Claus becomes increasingly widespread in American popular culture. But debates also intensify about the holiday's meaning, including concerns from some religious leaders and social critics that Christmas is becoming too secular, too commercial, or too focused on indulgence and children's desires. You hear the critiques in sermons and newspapers, sometimes direct, sometimes wrapped in moral language. People warn against excess, against worldliness, against turning a holy day into a carnival of consumption. Some clergy dislike Santa because he shifts attention away from religious practice. Others tolerate him as long as he's framed as a moral helper, a figure who encourages generosity and good behavior. Historians still argue whether religious resistance to Santa is a major force that shapes how Santa is portrayed, pushing him to become more wholesome and less mischievous, or whether Santa's popularity grows largely independent of church opinion due to the strength of print culture and retail marketing. Standing here, you can feel both. Churches respond, sometimes trying to reclaim the holiday's focus. But the wider culture keeps adopting Santa because he's useful. He makes Christmas easier to sell and easier to feel. You step into a home where the parents are conflicted. They love seeing their children delighted. They also worry about teaching them greed. They want the holiday to be warm and moral, not just a parade of wants. They negotiate, like parents always do, between ideals and realities. They might limit gifts. They might emphasize charity. They might insist on church attendance. They might tell their children that Santa brings only modest things and that the best part of Christmas is family. Joke 1. You realize parenting debates are eternal. And the 19th century version of screen time panic is basically gift pile panic. Joke 2. You picture a Victorian parent saying, Santa will not be bringing you a second rocking horse, like that's the big moral crisis of the age. Joke 3. You imagine Santa himself reading these arguments and saying, Guys, I'm literally imaginary. Please relax. Outside, the stores continue to push the season. Advertising grows more sophisticated. Merchants realize that Santa is not just a story. He is a marketing tool. He can appear in promotions, in displays, in printed circulars. He can charm children and soften adults. He can make buying feel like generosity rather than commerce. And once that trick is discovered, it doesn't get undiscovered. A quirky tidbit slips in. Some late 19th century holiday promotions and publications begin featuring Santa in ways that emphasize lists, workshops, and the idea of organized gift production, aligning the myth subtly with industrial age sensibilities. Santa becomes the friendly face of an efficient system. It's almost funny, in a sleepy way, how neatly myth adapts to the economic era. A magical workshop is basically a factory with better PR. Historians still argue whether this alignment between Santa and commerce is the decisive factor that makes him win nationally, or whether Santa would have become dominant anyway because he solves social problems older Christmas customs created. You can feel Santa's practical appeal. He tames misrule by replacing it with a scripted domestic ritual. He replaces door-to-door, demanding with gift-giving that appears voluntary. He gives children a central role. He offers a harmless, repeatable story that can travel anywhere. But there's still resistance, especially from those who see the holiday becoming too child-centered, too indulgent, too distracting. Some critics argue that Santa encourages lying, because parents are literally constructing an elaborate deception. Others argue that it encourages materialism. Others argue it's simply silly. And yet, the critics often lose, not because their concerns are invalid, but because the culture's emotional appetite is bigger than their warnings. You see this in how families compromise. They keep Santa, but they also keep church. They keep gifts, but they also keep charity. They keep fun, but they also keep moral talk. The holiday becomes a layered thing, able to carry contradictions without collapsing. That's part of its strength. Christmas becomes the rare cultural space where you can be deeply religious, lightly religious, not religious at all, sentimental, commercial, charitable, and exhausted, all at the same time. A mainstream historical fact threads through this. By the end of the 19th century, many of the core components of what people now recognize as an American Christmas are in place, including the widespread presence of Santa Claus imagery, Christmas trees, gift-giving practices, and a strong emphasis on family-centered celebration. There are still variations, but the national template is emerging. You stand on a street corner and watch children talk about Santa with that bright seriousness kids have when they're negotiating belief. He's real. He's not real. He's real, but my dad helps. He's real, but he only comes if you're asleep. They build theories. They test them. The myth becomes a shared childhood project. Historians still argue whether Santa's cultural dominance is best understood as a top-down creation shaped by writers, illustrators, and merchants, or a bottom-up adoption driven by families seeking joy and stability. Watching the children, you suspect it's both, again, because culture loves teamwork. Adults build the stage. Kids bring the belief. The holiday becomes a co-production, and now you can feel the century nearing its handoff. The debates don't end, but Santa's position becomes increasingly secure. The red-suited figure, not yet perfectly standardized to the exact modern look, is now firmly lodged in the American imagination. You step back into a parlor where the tree glows. The gifts are stacked modestly. The children are finally sleepy. And you sense that the last chapter of this transformation is about consolidation. The modern Christmas is about to take the wheel fully, with all its comfort and contradictions. And you're about to arrive at the late 1800s moment where the holiday's familiar shape settles in. You turn toward that final section, carrying the echoes of street misrule, hearth magic, charity halls, war camps, shop windows, and letters, ready to watch them fuse into the Christmas you recognize. Right before the century fades out, you step into the late 1800s and it feels like the holiday has finally decided what it wants to be when it grows up. Not perfectly, not without contradictions, but with a kind of confident shape. You can walk down a street in December now and recognize the cues. Evergreens in windows, shop displays pulling crowds, church services still holding their place, families building warmth indoors, children buzzing with anticipation, and Santa's presence hovering over it all like a friendly, slightly nosy spirit. The older chaos hasn't vanished completely, but it's been pushed to the margins, tamed by schedules and social expectations. The door-to-door demanding has softened into caroling or into organized charity. Misrule has been domesticated into rituals that feel safe. The hearth is still the heart, but now it has props. The tree, the stockings, the gifts, the printed card, the storybook. A mainstream historical fact anchors the consolidation. By the end of the 19th century, many elements of the modern American Christmas are widely established, including the Christmas tree in many middle-class homes. Santa Claus as a dominant cultural figure, increasingly common gift-giving on December 25th, and the framing of Christmas as a family-centered season of sentiment, generosity, and moral reflection. You walk through a neighborhood where families are preparing for Christmas morning like it's a coordinated performance. Parents whisper in kitchens, paper rustles. A small pile of gifts is hidden behind a door. A stocking is hung with more certainty now. Not as an experiment, but as a tradition with rules. Children are sent to bed earlier than usual, and they protest like it's their constitutional right to stay awake. The parents insist, and the children surrender, because the myth requires sleep as a kind of offering. Joke 1. You realize Santa's greatest power is not flight. It's the ability to make parents enforce bedtime with supernatural authority. Joke 2. You picture the 19th century equivalent of, "Do you have batteries?" which is basically, "Do we have enough candles and string?" And the panic is the same. Joke 3. You imagine Santa trying to fit down a narrow chimney in a tight city row house and immediately understanding why he needs to be magical. Santa's look is recognizable now in broad strokes. Not every depiction is identical, but the common features are there: the beard, the fur-trimmed clothing, the jolly expression, the sense that he's more grandfatherly than saintly. The North Pole idea is circulating. The list idea is circulating. The workshop idea is circulating. Even if a household doesn't fully embrace every detail, the cultural template is strong enough that people know what you mean when you mention him. And the debates still exist. Of course, churches still emphasize religious meaning. Critics still warn about indulgence. But the holiday has learned how to carry both sacred and secular at once, like a person balancing two heavy buckets without spilling too much. It becomes a season with multiple doors. You can enter through worship, through family warmth, through charity, through commerce, through nostalgia. A quirky tidbit slips in as you watch a family arrange gifts. Late 19th century holiday rituals increasingly include deliberate staging for children, with parents creating signs of Santa's visit, like footprints near the hearth or half-eaten treats. To make the myth feel tangible, the performance becomes part of the pleasure. Adults are not just tolerating the story now, they're producing it. They are set designers for wonder. Historians still argue whether this turn towards staged domestic magic represents a deeper cultural need for enchantment in an increasingly industrial, rational world, or whether it's simply a byproduct of consumer culture needing a narrative to make purchases feel meaningful. Standing here, you can feel the industrial world outside. Factories, railroads, time clocks, mass production. And then you look at the parlor and see people building a pocket of magic by hand. It feels like rebellion, even if it's gentle. It's a refusal to let everything be purely practical. You step into a department store again, and the contrast is striking. The store is bright, crowded, and confident. It sells ornaments, toys, ribbons, candies, printed cards, seasonal books. It sells everything needed to construct the ideal Christmas. But it also sells the idea that you must construct it. The season becomes an annual project, a kind of ritualized production cycle. Buy, decorate, give, host, clean up, repeat. Historians still argue whether this commercialization ultimately strengthens Christmas by making it a shared national experience or weakens it by turning it into pressure and performance. The answer changes depending on who you are. For some, commerce makes the season accessible. For others, it makes it stressful. For some, it makes giving easier. For others, it makes giving feel like an obligation measured in money. You walk into a church on Christmas Day and feel the quiet difference. The sanctuary is full. People sing hymns that feel steadier now, more integrated into public life. The nativity story is told with familiar warmth. For many, this remains the center, the anchor. And even those who treat Santa as the main event often still feel the pull of sacred language, if only as a seasonal backdrop. The holiday becomes layered, not replaced. Outside again, you see carolers, but now they feel more like tradition than like a social negotiation. The rough edges have been sanded down. Neighborhoods are learning to participate without feeling threatened. Charity events continue, often tied to churches and civic groups, reinforcing the idea that Christmas should include generosity beyond the household. That moral frame helps justify the season's indulgence. Give, and you can enjoy. Help others, and you can feel good about your own feast. And then you see the children. Always the children. They are the central audience now. The holiday is being calibrated to their wonder. Parents, grandparents, teachers, writers, merchants, clergy, all of them in some way are now working within a cultural assumption. Christmas is for kids, and adults are the caretakers of its magic. Historians still argue whether this child-centered holiday ultimately reshapes American family life by strengthening emotional bonds, or whether it places unrealistic expectations on parents, particularly mothers, to manufacture perfect domestic warmth. Again, both. The holiday can be beautiful. It can also be exhausting. It can be a refuge. It can also be a test. You slow your steps as you realize you've arrived at the handoff point. The 19th century has taken a holiday that was uneven, contested, sometimes rowdy, sometimes suspicious, sometimes deeply religious, and it has built a new version that feels cohesive, the modern American Christmas. It is still full of tension, still full of contradictions, but it has a recognizable shape that will carry forward into the 20th century with increasing force. You stand at the edge of a snowy street and watch as a family closes their door for the night. The sound is final and comforting. Inside, a fire glows. A tree stands dark now. Candles snuffed, its ornaments catching faint ambient light. Stockings hang limp but promising. Somewhere upstairs, a child finally sleeps, clutching a simple toy or a hope or both. And you can feel how everything you've walked through has fused into this, the old hearth rituals, the greenery, the songs, the charity, the war-wrought longing, the store windows, the letters, the debates, all of it converging into a tradition that says, for a moment, you can be warm, you can be together, you can pretend the world is softer. You take a deep breath, and as you exhale, you let the pace of your thoughts begin to slow, the way the holiday itself slows once the night settles. The cold outside is still cold, but you're not out there anymore. You're in the afterglow now, in the gentle drift where history stops being loud and becomes a lullaby. The street grows quieter. Footsteps fade. Even the wind seems to ease up, as if it's tired of arguing with shutters. In the distance, a bell rings once, soft and lonely, then disappears into the dark. You picture the mail sacks, the carolers, the crowded store, the soldiers at campfires, and you let those images float away like embers rising and going out. Now you're back at the hearth, the original center of it all, watching the last steady flames. The room smells faintly of pine and smoke and something sweet that clings to the air after baking. You can feel sleep tugging at the edges of your mind like a warm blanket being pulled up slowly. There's nothing you need to solve tonight, nothing you need to prove. The holiday has done what it always tries to do, even in its rougher, older forms. It has carried you through the dark. You let your shoulders drop. You let the noise of the world recede. The fire makes that soft, rhythmic crackle that sounds like a whispered story finishing itself. Outside, snow continues to fall, not dramatically, just steadily, filling in footprints, smoothing sharp edges, making everything look gentler than it really is. And you can stay right here in that softened world, letting history fade into warmth, letting the images blur into comfort, letting the night become kind. End of script. Sweet dreams.